The Sith Grand Plan had two main architects until it came into fruition, these being Palpatine, obviously, but also his master Darth Plagueis the Wise, who was instrumental to the success of the plan to take over the Republic and destroy the Jedi Order. In this video, we'll cover the backstories and entire life of these two in chronological order, starting off with Palpatine's master, Darth Plagueis the Wise. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? I thought not. It's not a story the Jedi would tell you. Those were the very words Sheev Palpatine used to lure Anakin Skywalker to the dark side of the Force. And it was the same Darth Plagueis that set up the final part of the grand plan of the Sith as the master of Palpatine to eventually bring the Republic and the Jedi Order to fall. Chapter 1. Prelude to Birth. Long before Plagueis was born, Darth Tenebris was the secret Dark Lord of the Sith, who was working as a starship designer named Rugus Gnome. He was a Bith, and the latest Sith Lord that came from the long lineage of Darth Bane's rule of two. He had just killed his own master as he felt that he was the most suited to carry the grand plan of the Sith forward, the plan to destroy the Republic. Tenebris at that time had already begun diving deep into the dark art of possessing another body by manipulating the midichlorians. He wanted his consciousness to survive until the creation of the Chosen One, a prophesied person to bring balance to the Force. So, he set out on a quest to find a suitable and powerful apprentice talented enough to one day serve as his vessel. One day, he came across a Force-sensitive moon named Car Damask, a middle-ranking banking clan agent. Tenebris contemplated if he would be suitable as an apprentice, but ultimately deemed the moon not suitable as an apprentice. Years later, the Sith Lord still hasn't found a suitable apprentice, but discovered a lower caste female moon who was also Force sensitive. She wasn't strong enough in the Force, but she was useful enough to Tenebris, who took her under his wing as a disciple. According to his calculations, an offspring between this woman and Damask would produce a disciple powerful in the Force. For that purpose, Tenebris ordered his disciple to seduce Car Damask in the hopes of hearing a child. Chapter 2. Early Life of Higo Damask. Tenebris' disciple succeeded, so somewhere between 200 and 100 BBY, the moon known as Higo Damask was born as the son of Car Damask, who had become Maigito's administrator. Higo didn't have a normal childhood though, not only because he was the son of a powerful figure, but also because he was bred and raised by his mother to become a Sith apprentice for Tenebris. His mother recorded every detail of his childhood, knowing completely well it was her mission to prepare Higo to be Tenebris' apprentice. She allowed him to explore the deepest and darkest corners of his feelings, one of the Sith's sources of power. Higo also grew up with playmates his mother picked for him, to observe his interactions with them, and just before he turned 5, he discovered his gifts with the Force. But he did not do so by accidentally making a stone float or having visions of the future. Instead, Higo learned that he could use his powers to manipulate the feelings of his playmates. At one point, he experimented with these powers, using them to influence one of his playmates he disliked to commit suicide. Upon discovering her son's potential, Higo's mother revealed to him that they had the same gifts, and that they needed to keep this a secret. Intrigued by his mother's words, the young Damask went along with his mother's wishes, believing his unique gifts needed to be kept in the dark. But at the same time, he also thought his mother simply wanted what was best for him. Eventually, his parents handed him over to Tenebris, as was planned by him. Tenebris gave his father an opportunity to advance his career through his network, and Higo's mother was always loyal to the Dark Lord of the Sith. The young Damask left Maigito for the first time in his life, becoming Darth Plagueis upon assuming his role as Tenebris' apprentice. Car Damask, thanks to Tenebris' help, eventually became so powerful that he rose to the top as the chairman of the banking clan. Meanwhile, Higo's mother disappeared without a trace, having already fulfilled her mission to produce and prepare a child for her master. 5 years later, Plagueis learned of everything that led to his birth and eventual fate as the new Sith apprentice. He had mixed feelings about this revelation because he didn't know what to think of being a product of his master's machinations. His fate wasn't his own, even before his birth, but at the same time, he also believed he had a special place as a Sith Lord, especially when he was designed for this very purpose. Chapter 3. Darth Tenebris' Apprentice. Plagueis lived a sheltered life before leaving Maigito for the first time.
But traveling with Tenebris as his apprentice allowed him to acquaint himself with the backwater areas of the galaxy, especially in the Outer Rim territories. He and his master went on different missions where they sowed discontent and chaos in systems around the galaxy to weaken the Republic in time for the return of the Sith to power. During the early part of his apprenticeship, Plagueis learned the basics of the dark side and how to use the Force. But Tenebris also taught him how to be cunning, deceitful, and manipulative throughout their travels. It was important for Tenebris to build a strong network of future allies they could call upon when the time was right for the Sith to take their place at the center of the galaxy. To that end, he wanted Plagueis to eventually take on his public persona as Higo Damask, a wealthy industrialist who used his family's fortune and influence to help Tenebris grow his inner circle. Despite that, he was yet to become a true Sith apprentice, for he was yet to show his unwavering allegiance to the dark side. Plagueis needed to be tested, and Tenebris believed the best way to challenge his apprentice's resolve was to make him commit the ultimate act that showed his lack of empathy: killing someone. Tenebris tasked him with assassinating Karad Santh the Elder, a powerful industrialist with a large share in one of the biggest weapons manufacturing companies in the galaxy. Santh had wronged Tenebris in the past after scamming him out of a starship deal, so it was like hitting two birds with one stone for him. On one hand, he would exact his revenge on Santh. On the other end, the assassination would prove whether or not Plagueis was ready to kill someone in cold blood. Knowing he needed to be subtle with his approach, Plagueis used the Force to choke Karad to death during a banquet. It was after his first real murder that Plagueis truly understood the allure of the dark side of the Force. This wasn't the first time he took a life. After all, he manipulated a child into committing suicide when he was just a kid himself. But outright killing someone for the first time was a different feeling that ultimately made him stronger in the dark side. Soon after that, his father, Kar Damask, had fallen ill and died to a congenital disease. This meant that the head of Damask Holdings was open and up for grabs. Getting access to the vast funds and resources would be advantageous for the Sith. Plagueis thus returned to Munilinst, the banking clan's home planet, to meet the rest of his clan. However, because he was the son of Damask's second wife, his half-siblings never accepted him, even seeking to have him disinherited. He learned, however, that the disease his father had died of affected all his children, except for Plagueis, who was born from a different mother. Plagueis used this to his advantage. He hired a geneticist to conduct fake treatments on all of his half-siblings. One by one, all of his brothers and sisters fell to their deaths, with Plagueis rejoicing after getting the last laugh. Through that, Plagueis became the sole head of the Damask family, inheriting his father's massive fortune and influence. This included becoming the leader of the Sojourn Gatherings, which were secret gatherings involving industrialists, political leaders, and gangsters. Plagueis used this power over these leaders to his advantage by influencing them in preparation for the eventual fall of the Republic. However, while he may have risen in power and influence, Plagueis' training in the ways of the dark side was progressing slowly. Tenebris never wanted him to become a powerful Sith Lord. Instead, he focused Plagueis' training on his mastery over midichlorian manipulation. The goal was to teach his apprentice how to extend and preserve his own life in preparation for the coming of the Chosen One. In Tenebris' eyes, Plagueis was never meant to be a true Sith apprentice. He was only supposed to be Tenebris' temporary vessel until he could possess the Chosen One decades into the future. To that end, Tenebris took on another apprentice he named Darth Venomous, whose existence remained a secret to Plagueis. Venomous was supposed to be Tenebris' true apprentice in accordance with the Rule of Two. Tenebris favored him because Venomous was also a Bith, allowing them to share the same level of intelligence. What Tenebris was unaware of was that Plagueis was secretly honing his talents in the dark side of the Force. After all, he was working for the advancement of the Grand Plan, the Sith's ultimate goal of taking over the galaxy and destroying the Jedi. He understood he needed to be at his most powerful to finally see the plan coming to fruition during his lifetime, knowing only a powerful Sith could actually stand up against the Jedi Order. Plagueis wanted to stay true to the Grand Plan, the one goal the Sith envisioned nearly 1,000 years ago. His master, however, didn't want him to be powerful out of fear that possessing him would become more troublesome. Tenebris was more concerned about envisioning his place as the most powerful being in the galaxy by ultimately taking over the Chosen One through his apprentice's body. But Plagueis grew to levels far beyond what his master originally intended, opening up an inevitable clash between master and apprentice, especially with both Sith Lords pursuing two different goals. Chapter 4. Betraying Tenebris. In 67 BBY, Darth Tenebris learned of a cortosis deposit on the planet Baldemnik. Cortosis is a valuable metal that can temporarily short out a lightsaber upon contact, making it useful for the Sith in their inevitable clash with the Jedi. Tenebris wanted to personally inspect the source and went there with Plagueis and an M2 mining probe. But what they didn't know was that the same probe had been sabotaged. As much as Tenebris was trying to increase the Sith's influence, he still had enemies lurking everywhere. Chief among them were industrial rivals, such as the Subtext Mining Group, that wanted to take out as many competitors as they could. Knowing Nome and Damask could affect their profits if they were to mine the Cortosis pocket, Subtext Mining loaned them a drone programmed to kill them when the time was right. Meanwhile, the Sith Lords set out to survey the Cortosis vein using special suits designed to protect them from the extremely hot temperatures of the planet. For Tenebris, this was an important part of Sith history. He thought this mission was going to end the circle of the Rule of Two, a rule that Darth Bane started almost 1,000 years ago. Bane started this rule on his way to the Apatros Cortosis mine. So for Tenebris, there was a great significance in how he and his apprentice were on a similar mission involving Cortosis. He believed this mission was set to end the rule, especially since he had already broken it by taking on another apprentice aside from Plagueis. The two made their way deeper into the chasm until they came across a highly combustible variant of lethane gas near the Cortosis pocket. Suddenly, the probe turned on them, and with a little flame, igniting the gas in the chasm. The entire cave exploded in fire, forcing the Sith Lords to escape through the burning caverns. As they were making their escape, Plagueis noticed something odd. His master was acting out of character, seemingly distressed and worried. He had never seen Tenebris in this state before, making Plagueis believe his master sensed something alarming in the Force. Upon reaching their ships, the gas explosion caught up to them. The ceiling was collapsing around them. Tenebris used the Force to shield them from the fireball and held the collapsing ceiling back. Suddenly, the dark side of the Force spoke to Plagueis. This was his chance to finally take his place as the Master. Plagueis saw his master was at his most vulnerable, with one hand preventing the explosion from reaching them, while the other kept the ceiling from collapsing on their ship. In a split-second decision, Plagueis used the Force to collapse the ceiling over Tenebris. Overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the rocks crashing down on him, the Bith was buried under the rubble, with his body and bones crushed. Tenebris realized quickly that his apprentice wanted to take his place right then and there. Although the ceiling collapsing was subtle enough that it could have just been a result of the explosion. Plagueis rushed to Tenebris' side, sensing that he was barely clinging on to life. Plagueis still felt the need to act like it was an accident, and tried to comfort his master. Tenebris went along with Plagueis' act, bestowing the mantle of Dark Lord of the Sith to him. Now, Plagueis was the Sith Master tasked with carrying out the Grand Plan. When Tenebris coughed up after bestowing the title, Plagueis still felt like he should admit his betrayal, stating that Tenebris had it coming, as was the Sith tradition, and that Tenebris' death would be the end of the Rule of Two. Plagueis then snapped his master's neck, killing him definitely. Plagueis had done it. His master was no more. He reached out through the Force to study his former master's midichlorians, which he felt dying in the Bith's body. Both of them had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Plagueis wanted to take his master's place in order to carry out the Grand Plan without having to follow the Banite system of Rule of Two, as he sought to break the cycle of having his apprentice kill him, and then so on and so forth. Unbeknownst to him, though, Tenebris had also been preparing for this moment for a long time now. The Bith Sith Lord's experimentations with midichlorians had all led up to this moment. He had infected himself with a retrovirus that took away his precognition, the ability to see into the future or sense danger through the Force. But the same retrovirus turned his midichlorians into something he called maxichlorians, which carried the essence of his soul. So, as Plagueis was studying the dying midichlorians of his former master, Tenebris' maxichlorians snuck into his former apprentice's body through an open wound on the back of his neck. This was Tenebris' plan all along. The maxichlorians were supposed to take over Plagueis' body, replacing the moon's soul with Tenebris' essence. As Tenebris' conscience slowly infected Plagueis, he reached out and accessed Plagueis' foresight to take a glimpse into the future. Shocked, he realized a horrifying fate awaited him. Tenebris got hit with a vision where he saw that Plagueis would not live to see the rise of the Chosen One. Instead, he would die at the hands of his apprentice, the one he called the Shadow. Tenebris was always obsessed with reshaping the future. He wanted to be the one to lead the Sith during the coming of the Chosen One. But he always feared his own mortality, knowing the Chosen One would never come during his lifetime. He already knew his fate as merely one of the many Sith Lords who died at the hands of their own apprentices. The only problem is that his many visions in the past revealed to him that he was never going to be the one to lead the Sith's return to dominance. Instead, he saw visions of a shadowy figure bringing about the fall of the Jedi. But in his arrogance, he always thought that that shadowy figure would be himself. That was why he sought to change his fate. But seeing the Shadow killing Plagueis in this vision made him understand that he could never escape his fate, even if he were to take over his apprentice's body. Out of panic, he escaped the moon's body. In doing so, his Maxichlorians were trapped in that dark cave, leaving his soul to wander in this dark part of the galaxy forever. The aftermath of the infection, however, on Plagueis was that it did diminish his foresight abilities in the Force greatly, an ability that might have helped him sense his own eventual doom at the hands of this mysterious shadowy figure. Thus, Tenebris had damned them both. Chapter 5. Life after Tenebris. First though, Plagueis still had to escape the cavern he was trapped in. He may have succeeded at killing his master by forcing the ceiling to cave in on them, but it was at the cost of losing their ships. He could not repair any damage the ship suffered. Also, the wound on his neck was infected, leaving him in a weak and battered state. He took Tenebris' lightsaber and assured himself that the incident looked like an accident. Then, he used the Force to clear the rubble and create a pile of rocks high enough to climb out of the deep caverns. Hoping to find the nearest starport, the Sith Lord went on a long trek with little to no resources. At night, he took shelter in caves while replaying the events of the day in his head in an attempt to sleep. Suddenly, while doing so, he felt the presence of a being that nearly equaled his power. For him, this was impossible because, as far as he knew, he was the only Sith Lord alive. But Plagueis dismissed this as Tenebris' soul haunting him. After all, he had read stories of past Sith Lords haunting Darth Bane for desecrating the tomb of the Dark Lords. As hard as the trek to the nearest starport was, the moon escaped by sneaking into a transport ship and eventually killing the crew, except for a medical droid called 11-4D. The droid nursed him back to health and navigated the ship to a planet friendly to Damask Holdings. Having grown fond of the droid, Plagueis decided to bring him along with him. 4D eventually became an indispensable part of Plagueis' retinue. Upon his return to his home world, Plagueis initiated the annual Sojourn Gatherings, consolidating more power to Damask Holdings. To protect himself from any assassination attempts, he hired the Sun Guard, a powerful group of Thursian mercenaries known for rivaling the Mandalorians in strength and ferocity. During the gathering, however, the same dangerous being he sensed after killing Tenebris had found its way to Sojourn. Plagueis' Sun Guard informed him of an intruder who managed to get past security. Understanding that no ordinary being could have easily made his way through the Sun Guard, Plagueis realized this could have only been done by a powerful Force user. At that moment, he decided to meet this intruder in the planet's forests. He initially thought only a Jedi could be powerful enough in the Force to threaten him and break through the Sun Guard. But upon seeing this intruder igniting his red lightsaber, he realized he was facing something far more dangerous than a mere Jedi. Before him stood a Bith, the shadow of his former master. Plagueis was confused. It couldn't be Tenebris. He had killed him, and even studied the midichlorians leaving his body. He thought this must have been an artificial clone created through his former master's scientific experiments. This Bith, however, denied the possibility that he was but a mere clone. Instead, he claimed himself to be Darth Venomous, the true apprentice chosen by Tenebris himself. And his final mission to legitimize his claim to being a Sith Lord was to kill Darth Plagueis. I am Darth Venomous. Darth, we'll see about that. Your death will legitimize the title, Plagueis. In what was a short but fierce duel, the two disciples of Tenebris fought in what seemed like a stalemate. Venomous used the very same fighting style Plagueis used because Tenebris thought doing so would give him an advantage over the Moon Sith. Plagueis struggled but eventually gained the upper hand by disarming the imposter Sith Lord. With Venomous down on his knees, he begged Plagueis to take him in as his new Sith apprentice. Instead, Plagueis had other plans. Plagueis forced Venomous to poison himself with a comatose-inducing substance, having Venomous fall into a deep coma. The goal was to use the powerful Sith imposter's body for his midichlorian experiments because Force users as powerful as he was were far too rare and valuable. But upon investigating Venomous's ship, Plagueis learned that his rival had kept a record of the names and locations of other Force-sensitive people who had the potential to be his apprentice. But instead of seeing those Force-sensitive individuals as potential apprentices, Plagueis saw them as rivals to his position as the Dark Lord of the Sith. He wanted to solidify his place as the only true Sith Lord in the galaxy, unwilling to see any other Force-sensitive individual growing in the dark side and threatening his power. So, he sought to eliminate those potential rivals, starting by incapacitating a Shido skin shifter. Then, on the planet Seleucami, he encountered an Iktalchi prophet, who used the power of the Force to see into the future and predict the fall of both the Republic and the Jedi Order. She was sharing her visions with her followers until Plagueis arrived to interrupt her, telling the prophet that her message could potentially disrupt his plans. While the prophet assured the moon that she would undo her words, Plagueis used Force lightning to murder her in front of her followers. Then he went to the planet Abraxan to hunt down a Nautolan named Not Lair, who had killed dozens of people there. But while Plagueis could have easily defeated Lair, there was a bigger problem. The Jedi Master Nikata and his Padawan Lobuk were also on the planet to investigate the murders. This was Plagueis' first true encounter with a Jedi in the flesh, but instead of confronting them, he hid his Force abilities to keep the existence of the Sith a secret. It was not yet time for him to reveal that the Sith had been hiding in plain sight all along, and confronting the Nikata and her Padawan would only complicate the situation. Plagueis, however, found Lair first and identified himself as the Sith Master. He realized he could kill two birds with one stone, telling Lair he would take him in as his apprentice if he could kill the Jedi on that planet. If Lair were to kill them, Plagueis would have the opportunity to train a promising apprentice. But if the Jedi were to kill Lair, they would do Plagueis' work for him. True enough, Lair was no match for the Jedi, who struck him down in a brief duel. Plagueis succeeded without having to reveal his true powers to the Jedi. The now undisputed Dark Lord of the Sith had succeeded in eliminating every Force-sensitive prospect Venomous had been scouting to be his successor. But like any Sith Lord who had to adhere to the rule of two, he still eventually needed to take on an apprentice. His wish shall soon be fulfilled, though, as the dark side of the Force would come to steer his course toward the man who would eventually orchestrate the downfall of democracy. Chapter 6. Sheev Palpatine. Believing he had already wiped out anyone who posed a threat to his grand plan of one day destroying both the Republic and the Jedi Order, Plagueis went to Naboo to investigate the political scene there. At that time, he was more interested in politics, thinking that obtaining political and industrial power would help make his plans sail smoother. Damask Holdings supported Bon Topolo, a liberal candidate who wanted to open Naboo up to the rest of the galaxy and fully integrate it with the Republic. Plagueis believed that opening Naboo was best for his plans, because he wanted to use it as one of his future bases, while also profiting from the rich plasma resources that were recently discovered on the planet. On the other end of the electoral ring was someone who wanted to keep Naboo closed off to most of the galaxy to focus more on internal development. This rival of Topolo was heavily supported by a rich nobleman called Kasinga Palpatine, who used his family fortune to support his campaigns. But there was drama brewing within House Palpatine. Plagueis learned that Topolo had been secretly working with the 17-year-old son of none other than Kasinga himself. Sheev Palpatine had been secretly feeding information to Topolo because he was vehemently against his own father's beliefs. Curious about this young man, Plagueis took this chance to meet Sheev to get to know more about this treacherous young member of the Legislative Youth Program, an organization that honed youths interested in entering public service. Damask sought Palpatine out at the Theed University, convincing him to give him a tour of the city. But what initially surprised him during their first meeting was that he couldn't sense Sheev in the Force. Intrigued, his interest in the young man tickled his curiosity even more as he asked questions about Palpatine's viewpoints and relationship with his family. The Sith Lord learned of the young Palpatine's sour relationship with his father because of their different political opinions. Sheev wanted Naboo to open itself to the galaxy, contradicting Kasinga's isolationist stand. More importantly, he learned that Sheev was motivated by his ambition to see Naboo becoming part of the greater galaxy. This was the very reason why he undermined his father's political goals. Plagueis was impressed by his ambition and intelligence, both traits that the Sith Lord felt were necessary to achieve power. To that end, he offered to use Sheev as a spy to secure Topolo's victory and demask Holdings' interest in Naboo. The young Palpatine agreed under one condition, that he would report his findings to Plagueis alone and directly. Sheev had never had an older figure he could trust with his ideas and ambitions. He and Kosinga never saw eye to eye in relation to their political views, eventually contributing to their estrangement. But the way Plagueis showed interest in his potential and viewpoints convinced him he had an ally he could rely on. Meanwhile, the Moon Sith thought Palpatine saw him as the father figure he never had because he became the young man's only confidant. Plagueis went through days thinking about Sheev and even considered grooming him into the Supreme Chancellor under the control of the Sith when it was time to initiate the Grand Plan. But while Damask's relationship with the young Palpatine was flourishing, the father wasn't happy. On his second visit to Naboo, Plagueis received a stern warning from Kosinga to stay away from Naboo and his son. The head of House Palpatine had spies reporting to him that Damask and Sheev were growing closer, but Kosinga wasn't motivated by jealousy. Instead, he hated how his own son was communicating with one of his political rival's biggest supporters. Damask working closely with Sheev would undermine Kosinga's political stand, weakening his isolationist position. The Dark Lord, however, was undeterred by the politician's warnings. He eventually went to Chandrila to meet with Sheev, who was on a retreat sponsored by the Legislative Youth Program. Upon learning about Kosinga's warnings to Damask, the younger Palpatine was angry at his father for trying to meddle in his personal affairs. That release of anger made Plagueis realize even more just how powerful Sheev was. The Sith Lord felt Palpatine's sheer rage through the Force, making him understand that this young man was not only ambitious and powerful, but also extraordinarily strong in the Force. Sheev, meanwhile, eventually revealed that he sought ultimate power, the very same thing every Sith Lord always wanted to obtain. With that, Plagueis saw the chance to finally break the chain attaching the young Palpatine to his family. Plagueis convinced him he was willing to be his ally as long as Palpatine was also willing to free himself of the burdens and restrictions that held him down, including his own father. Plagueis then manipulated Palpatine into confronting his father by using his own story of how he killed his siblings to inherit the entire Damask Holdings estate. He also knew that Kosinga's spies were everywhere, including Chandrila. Plagueis not only convinced Sheev to grow angrier at his father and try to take over House Palpatine, but also provided Kosinga a reason to confront his son. The collision between the Palpatine father and son was inevitable, and all it required was one spark to ignite the flames brewing amongst them. As Palpatine was ready to leave for Naboo, one of his father's security guards escorted him to the family's starship. Kosinga confronted Sheev about his political views and relationship with Damask. The elder Palpatine decided to keep his son away from the elections by sending him to Chamel Minor, a planet near Naboo. Not wanting to be sent away, Sheev poured out years of pent-up frustrations in a verbal altercation that forced Kosinga to tell his son he wanted him dead from the very start. With all his rage ready to explode, Sheev instinctively drew upon the power of the dark side, killing the entire Palpatine family and the security guards single-handedly. Soon after the incident, he called Damask to help him destroy any evidence that led to him. Plagueis fainted the worried father figure, but rejoiced on the inside. After having killed every single one of Venmus's prospective apprentices, deeming them unworthy, Palpatine was finally someone who had everything he was looking for. He was the perfect Sith apprentice. Plagueis took Palpatine in, revealing the nature of the Sith to him and how together they could achieve ultimate power. Palpatine knelt before him and swore his undying loyalty to the Sith. And due to the insidious nature of his new apprentice, Plagueis branded him the Sith name, Darth Sidious. Taking on an apprentice was one thing, but training one was an entirely different challenge. Plagueis never underwent the right Sith training from Tenebris decades before meeting Palpatine. He received the basic training that allowed him to hone his powers in the dark side of the Force, but Tenebris mostly sent him on nonsense missions while diverting his training toward midichlorian control. Instead, Plagueis had to train his powers on his own, without his former master's consent. This time, however, he was dead set on training Sidious the right way, knowing that his apprentice was going to be the key to initiating the grand plan that Darth Bane had dreamt of nearly 1,000 years back. The first part of Sidious' training was designed to break him. Plagueis wanted his apprentice to kill his old self as Sheev Palpatine and remake him as Darth Sidious. This involved training so severe that it could potentially kill him, but the master did promise the apprentice one thing, that they would be free of the rule of two at the end of it all. That meant they would not keep secrets from each other or feel jealousy in their relationship. Unlike Tenebris, who kept secrets Plagueis only found out after his former master's death, the Moon wanted him and Sidious to be in sync and be in perfect harmony, all for the betterment of the dark side. He wanted to break the cycle where the apprentice eventually kills the master, and seeks for them to rule together for eternity, two individuals at the height of power. Shortly after his training began, Sidious inherited the Sith Archives, a knowledge bank with 1,000 years worth of knowledge passed down from one Sith Master to the apprentice. Upon examining the archives, Sidious learned that Sith Lords harbored secrets from each other because they focused on their own goals. But Plagueis saw it differently. Plagueis and Sidious were supposed to have the same goals, where both would rule their own fields. Unlike Tenebris, who held knowledge and power from Plagueis, the Moon Sith taught everything he knew to Palpatine out of fear that the power he had collected would be lost forever. Sidious trained under his master over the course of decades. During his training, Sidious had to face his fears, understand the absence of pleasure, and how to use his negative emotions to master the dark side. Chapter 7. Laying the Foundation of the Grand Plan. Training Sidious to be his equal in power and knowledge was only a small part of the Grand Plan. 1,000 years ago, Darth Bane initiated the Grand Plan together with the Rule of Two. His goal was to keep the Sith's survival a secret, all while passing power and knowledge down from a master to an apprentice. The goal was for the apprentice to surpass the master and take on another apprentice, who also had to surpass the master. In doing so, every generation of Sith would be stronger than the previous one. The Grand Plan involved every generation of master and apprentice to lay down the bricks of discord and political chaos, to destabilize not only the Republic, but its protectors, the Jedi Order from within. Plagueis believed that it was during his era that the Grand Plan would finally come to fruition. To this end, he and Palpatine needed to steadily lay down the foundations of their plan early enough to keep things in steady motion in preparation for the fall of the Jedi. The first step towards success in the plan was that the Sith needed a figurehead in the political battlefield to plunge the Republic into chaos. Plagueis himself had played his role as an industrialist amassing assets and allies. Now he needed someone to amass political power, and Palpatine was the perfect candidate for that. So, during one of the Sojourn gatherings, he and Sidious decided the galaxy was ripe for the taking from a political standpoint. Palpatine had to become part of the Galactic Senate. Thus, Palpatine orchestrated the assassination of the current Senator of Naboo, Vidar Kim. With the previous senator gone, Palpatine stepped up as a candidate, eventually winning and taking his seat on the Galactic Senate of Coruscant. With that, the Sith had their end to the chamber of the highest power in the Republic. Now, all Palpatine had to do was amass power and popularity as a senator. He used a rather subtle approach as a senator, becoming friendly with powerful individuals instead of contradicting their views. He allowed everyone to look down on him, subtly feeding the egos of the other senators while also making friends with political leaders from large and small systems alike. Palpatine never wanted to rush his rise to power, in accordance with his master's will. Instead, they both agreed that it was best for him to slowly yet steadily grow his influence as a politician. The act worked, and Palpatine became one of the most popular senators among his fellow members of the Senate, and even the common people. Plagueis, meanwhile, turned his studies back toward the midichlorians. The bigger part of the plan for both of them to rule eternally needed them to become immortal, and he knew that the midichlorians held the key to that quest. Any day he wasn't required to fill a public role as Higo Damask was dedicated toward his research on the midichlorians. In 52 BBY, Plagueis made contact with Kaminoans, a race of people living in Kamino beyond the Outer Rim. The Kaminoans were the best in the known galaxy at cloning, a technology indispensable for Plagueis. He wanted the Kaminoans to create a powerful clone army to eradicate the Jedi Order. After all, 2 Sith Lords, no matter how powerful they may be, would never be enough to defeat thousands of Jedi. The original plan was for the Kaminoans to use Yanchori clones because they were naturally immune to many Force powers. However, the Kaminoans rejected the idea because the Yanchori were so naturally aggressive that it would be extremely hard to control them in an organized military setup. This would also make it unlikely for them to obey orders, an important aspect in the eventual downfall of the Jedi. So, Plagueis had to set this part of the plan aside. But while the plan to create clones had to be suspended for now, Plagueis encountered a man who would soon become an important piece of the conflicts to come. During a meeting hosted by Count Vemic of Sereno, Damask participated in a talk attended by a small group of Jedi, namely Jocasta Nu, Sifo-Dyas, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Dooku. The meeting involved a dispute between Sereno and Selenon over a hyperwave transceiver. But while Plagueis and Damask Holdings also had a stake in that meeting because he wanted to sow discord between several companies and systems, what the secret Sith Lord noticed was Dooku's increasing dissatisfaction with the Republic. While Dooku was one of the strongest and most skilled Jedi Masters in the Order, he was steadily losing faith in the Republic. But it was not because the system was flawed, but only because the people running it were corrupt. He believed more senators were involved in corruption, often only enriching their pockets and chasing individual interests instead of helping the galaxy as a whole. Plagueis sensed this growing discontent within the Jedi Master, eventually thinking he could recruit Dooku as a backup to Sidious in case he lost his apprentice. Plagueis also took this opportunity to engage in a discussion with the Jedi to further understand the motivations and viewpoints of his enemies, without them knowing who he truly was. Chief among his dissenters was Qui-Gon Jinn, Dooku's former Padawan. Qui-Gon accused Damask Holdings of trying to ferment chaos in the Outer Rim to profit from their issues and problems. However, Dooku and Sifo-Dyas thought differently. To them, Damask was talking about an inevitable conflict with the Republic, specifically an impending split between the core and outer systems, while Dooku agreed wholeheartedly that the Senate was corrupt and that he wanted to correct the flaws within the Republic. Sifo-Dyas was a bit more soft-spoken about his opinions because he was still loyal to the Republic. It was right then and there that Plagueis realized a big weakness within the Jedi Order. At that point, the Jedi had become so righteous and obedient to the Republic that they were willing to look past corrupt senators and leaders because this would make them appear as enemies of peace and justice. The Jedi believed they existed only to protect the Republic instead of correcting it. So, knowing that the Jedi Order would do everything in its power to fight for the Republic, Plagueis realized that the best way to defeat them was not by creating a clone army to fight them. Instead, he needed an army that the Jedi would trust enough to fight alongside, especially when the Republic's existence was at stake. The Jedi he shared his vision with was Sifo-Dyas, the one who feared the most for the Republic. Sifo-Dyas was loyal to the Republic to a fault, but it was his fear of losing the Republic that made him the most vulnerable out of all the Jedi present in that meeting. So, Plagueis was about to tell him about the cloners on Kamino, only for the dark side of the Force to tell him to suspend its plans upon seeing that Jocasta Nu was about to speak to them. Plagueis never stopped grooming Dooku and Sifo-Dyas as potential allies he could manipulate. Upon returning to Coruscant, Plagueis told Palpatine about the pair of Jedi Masters who were prone to the dark side, and could be beneficial sometime later. Chapter 8. Taking a Back Seat. In 52 BBY, Plagueis attended a gathering hosted by the Order of the Canted Circle. This was a meeting between some of the most powerful people in the industrial sector, including many moons from Damask Holdings. With Plagueis about to be initiated into the group, everyone needed to wear black robes that hid their faces. However, it was all a trap. Not too long later, several attendees of the gathering threw their cloaks and revealed themselves as Maladian assistants, sent to kill the powerful leaders in that secretive order. The assassins threw countless decapitator discs that cut down several of the moons. While the Dark Lord of the Sith was powerful, the retrovirus that infected him years ago upon Tenebrous' death took away much of his ability to sense the future. Thus, he didn't sense this danger coming. One of the discs had severed his trachea and blood vessels on the side of his throat. For any normal being, the injury would have killed him. But Plagueis was a Sith Lord after all, and his skill in the Force allowed him to shut his wounds down to prevent blood loss while keeping himself conscious. Enraged, he mounted his own counterattack, ripping apart the assassin using the dark side of the Force. Luckily for him, Palpatine had learned of the assassination attempt on Plagueis before the meeting began, and was already on his way. He arrived just in time, finding his master fighting for his life. Palpatine ignited his lightsaber and made quick work of the remaining assassins. Plagueis survived the attack but was left seriously injured. The decapitator disc that nearly ended his life took off a considerable part of the moon's lower face. These injuries henceforth forced him to wear a transpirator that covered his face below the nose to keep himself alive. His brush with death made him understand the mortality of his existence. Not even a Sith Lord of his power was immune to death, making Plagueis more obsessed than ever with the preservation of his life. From here on out, he lived a secluded life in his laboratory, devoting his time and energy entirely to the study of midichlorians, eventually using them to heal himself partially from his wounds. Ego Damask had all but vanished from the public eye. He learned more about the nature of midichlorians, seeking to manipulate their power for his own benefit. He gave the implementation and reins of the Grand Plan entirely to Palpatine, having Palpatine update him on their progression. Palpatine himself was fully devoted to the political side, becoming more and more influential in the Senate. During that time, Sidious also took in an apprentice of his own, a Dathomirian Zabrak he named Darth Maul. It was rare for a Sith apprentice to take on his own apprentice with the Master's consent. Other apprentices had apprentices of their own but kept them secret. On the other hand, Plagueis was aware of Maul's existence, because Sidious trained him under his master's watchful eye. But he allowed Sidious to take Maul in, not because he was supposed to replace him according to the rule of two. Instead, Plagueis thought Maul could be a useful tool and assassin for the Sith. Despite his secluded nature, Plagueis still pulled a few strings that consolidated more assets to their side. The Trade Federation, a group of Neimoidian merchants and businessmen, had grown into a large cartel that controlled much of the galaxy's trade routes, eventually monopolizing trade in different parts of the Republic. Plagueis and Palpatine agreed that they needed influence on this powerful company. The Dark Lord went on to broker a secret deal where the Trade Federation would develop some of the trade zones in the Outer Rim for the Republic. In exchange, the Trade Federation received a seat in the Galactic Senate as if the cartel were a planetary system. These secret negotiations with both the Trade Federation and the Republic allowed Plagueis to secure the Neimoidians' loyalty, and now had direct access to their highest members. Furthermore, he helped them secure a deal to harvest plasma from Naboo, as he still had his contacts with King Topolo. For the next 20 years, Plagueis kept devoting himself to his studies, and writing all of it down into a book he called the Book of Sith. Throughout this time, he denied himself of any sleep in order to always keep his guard up. He shall not be surprised again. His life was too precious. Plagueis' stance on the Force was that instead of looking at it as a mystical being that needed to be revered and worshipped, he sought to understand it from a purely scientific context. For him, the Force was not a mystical entity that could never be understood. That was the Jedi way of thinking. Instead, he tried to examine its objective nature to get a deeper understanding of what the Force truly was. To understand the nature of the Force was to find a way to manipulate it for his own benefit. To say that the Force works in mysterious ways is to admit one's ignorance, for any mystery can be solved through the application of knowledge and unrelenting effort. As we had our way with the Senate, and as we will soon have our way with the Republic and the Jedi, we will have our way with the Force. He accepted the classification of the Force into 3 categories. The first is the Eparian, which is the equivalent of the unifying force, the aspect of the Force that surrounds and unites every being in the galaxy. Then there's the Anima, which is the equivalent of the living force, the energy of all life forms. Finally, there was the Pneuma, the conscious thought that's expressed in the Force. Plagueis' focus on midichlorians was because he believed they had a uniquely strong connection to all these 3 aspects of the Force. In his mind, understanding this unique connection would allow him to master life and death. But at that point, he not only wanted to overcome death, but also master life, in the sense of actually manipulating the midichlorians to create life. He also sought to explore the possibility of using the midichlorians to manipulate space-time, and the preservation of consciousness after death. In his quest to find answers to his questions and try to prove whether or not there is life after death, Plagueis left his lab and traveled to Korriban, the old seat of the Sith Empire thousands of years ago. He hoped to make contact with the soul of a long-dead Sith, only for him to encounter the legendary Marka Ragnos' soul in a vision. But while the Sith Lord, who lived more than 5,000 years ago, challenged Plagueis' claim to the title of Dark Lord, he never answered any of his questions. Upon regaining his consciousness, Plagueis assumed it was only a mere hallucination. The trip didn't help him much, to his dismay. He came back and went back to his studies. At some point, as his research and progression advanced, he felt confident enough that he might be able to manipulate the legend of the Chosen One. According to the prophecy, a Chosen One uniquely powerful in the Force would one day come to restore balance by destroying the Sith. However, Plagueis believed he could use this prophecy to his advantage by using the Chosen One not as a savior of the Jedi, but as an extension of his will. He was confident that mastering the art of manipulating midichlorians would make this a trivial matter. Throughout his studies, Plagueis often used Venomous's body as a test subject. To test his theories about life and death, he proceeded to kill him after having kept him in a coma for decades. Then he used his knowledge of midichlorians to resurrect Venomous, succeeding in that experiment. At that moment, he gleefully realized that he was one step closer to overcoming death. It was a feat no one had accomplished up until this point in the history of the Sith. In the coming weeks, he repeated the process of killing and reviving Venomous to completely master the process. Plagueis brought Palpatine in and updated him on the progression of his studies and showed him how he could revive and kill Venomous. Palpatine was most intrigued. No other Sith in history had been capable of this feat before, to their knowledge. Eventually, though, Venomous died a permanent death when his organs could no longer support the tedious process. To that end, Plagueis realized that even if he could resurrect someone from the dead, the original body was still a mortal shell that could give out. He understood that if he wanted to have complete mastery over death, he had to transfer a soul from one body to another, a knowledge his former master had almost perfected. The problem, however, was that he was yet to master this aspect of the dark side. But death wasn't the only thing he wanted to master. He also found that the midichlorians could be used to create life, perhaps even a vessel purely made from the Force that could then hold his essence should his body fail, just like with Venomous. Together with Palpatine, Plagueis entered into a meditative state where he and his apprentice sought to shift the balance of the Force in favor of the dark side. Plagueis then took it one step further, mentally reaching out to the inhabitants of the galaxy and using the Force to influence the midichlorians to try and create life. He wanted a being of his own creation and engineering, but it was a blatant violation of the nature of the Force. He and Sidious poured their malice into the Force, using it to influence the midichlorians to heed their call and bring forth a being of their engineering. However, their efforts were in vain, as Plagueis realized the Force ignored his commands. Shortly after their attempt to create life, Plagueis noticed that all his test subjects succumbed to diseases. He theorized that this was feedback from the Force itself. What he and Sidious did was so unnatural that the Force had to oppose the Sith's efforts. It was a big setback. Chapter 9: The Naboo Invasion. Nearly a decade after the failed attempt to manipulate the Force into creating life, Plagueis and Sidious worked in tandem to coerce the Yanchori into an aggressive war just after they were admitted into the Republic. These people were once the ideal clone candidates for Plagueis in his attempt to destroy the Jedi, but because they were far too aggressive to control, he realized it was best to destroy the Yanchori as they had the ability to resist Force powers, a quality that threatened the Sith. The bloodshed eliminated the Yanchori as potential dangers to a future Sith rule. More importantly, the inability to peacefully resolve the situation with the Yanchori thoroughly weakened Chancellor Finis Valorum's position as the leader of the Republic. Palpatine, being a popular senator, wasn't enough for the Grand Plan to succeed. It was necessary for him to become the Supreme Chancellor, the leader of the entire Republic. For that to happen, they needed Valorum out of power in a subtle yet resounding way. Throughout the years, they kept sowing distrust and weakened Valorum's position. With that, more and more systems lost confidence in the Chancellor's leadership, creating the necessary circumstances for Palpatine to eventually take over as the new Chancellor. Sometime later that year, King Ars Viruna of Naboo requested Palpatine's presence on Theed during a time when there was political strife. The young leader, Padme Nabari, had been threatening Varuna's re-election as the ruling monarch. He suspected that Palpatine had been working against him by supporting Padme and undermining his relationship with the Trade Federation. To that end, there were no friendly faces around the Sith apprentice. Sidious was surrounded by malicious individuals, most of whom were gangsters and terrorists. Varuna informed Palpatine he was aware of his political ambitions. He was also made aware that he would no longer serve as a senator and that he was never going to see Damask ever again. It turned out that Varuna had planned an assassination on Plagueis on Sojourn, where he was conducting his experiments. Luckily for Plagueis, he had allied himself with the interplanetary gangster Jabba the Hutt. The two had previously agreed on a partnership where Jabba would feed Plagueis information about the Bando Gora terrorist that had been targeting some of Damask's allies. In exchange for that information, Damask Holdings had to cut out their support for Gardula Bisadi the Elder, one of Jabba's rivals. Jabba eventually learned that the same Bando Gora terrorist had been sent by Varuna to Sojourn to bomb the planet. Upon learning of the latest attempt on his life, the Moon Sith Lord destroyed every test subject and data in his lab before promptly escaping. Ships arrived to bombard Sojourn before finally destroying the moon using a nuclear device. Plagueis miraculously survived the attempt on his life, shocking Varuna. The King of Naboo, terrified, abdicated his throne and ran for his life, knowing that his enemies were out for revenge. Plagueis and Sidious conferred, with Palpatine suggesting they send Maul after the former king, but Plagueis objected. He wanted to eliminate the man who nearly killed him and forced him to abandon his experiments himself. Upon finding Varuna, Plagueis revealed his true identity as the Dark Lord of the Sith before telling them he was one responsible for his rise to the throne of Naboo. The Sith Lord then killed him by slowly manipulating the limited amount of midichlorians in the former king. Killing Varuna not only strengthened him and satisfied his lust for revenge, but also added more fuel to the fires of a civil war. With Varuna gone, Padme rose to the throne of Naboo, becoming Queen Amidala and ending the line of kings. Amidala's policies went against the Trade Federation, imposing additional taxes on the plasma they harvested from the planet to protect the interest of the inhabitants of Naboo. The policies angered the Trade Federation enough for them to consider aggressive tactics against Naboo. This all playing into the grand plan of the Sith. What Plagueis didn't know was that in fact it was Sidious who had secretly manipulated Varuna to divert his anger toward Damask and eventually convince him to try and assassinate him. Plagueis thought naively that Sidious would want to share the power and all was in perfect harmony between them, blindly trusting Sidious that he'd go along with his break with the rule of two. Meanwhile, the Republic, through Palpatine's manipulation on Chancellor Valorum, decided to impose taxes on the Trade Federation's free trade routes. The Trade Federation was outraged. Viceroy Newt Gunray, the leader of the Trade Federation, who had been planted at the head by Sidious and Plagueis, followed their every command. Sidious told him that he had to make a blockade around Naboo. Gunray followed swiftly and proceeded with the blockade on Sidious's order. The Trade Federation threatened the Republic that any attempt to break the embargo would be met with aggression, and that if their demands were not met, the people of Naboo would die of starvation. This event should further show the galaxy how ineffective Valorum and the Republic were to protect its member worlds. To the Sith's surprise, though, Chancellor Valorum called up the Jedi Order for help to negotiate with the Trade Federation. Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi were selected to try to reason with the Newt Gunray. This was an unexpected move, as the Sith believed the chances of the Jedi interfering with the blockade were minimal at best, because the Senate had placed restrictions on the Chancellor to use the Jedi Order as he pleased. Previous events that led to tragedy in different parts of the galaxy also made the Sith think that the Senate was reluctant to use the Jedi to clear this mess up. But Valorum went behind the Senate's back to resolve the mess, even if it meant losing the trust of the entire Senate. Plagueis and Sidious were afraid of what could happen if the Jedi were to interfere with the blockade. If Jinn and Kenobi were to dive deeper into the Trade Federation's motives for the blockade, there was a chance they would eventually uncover the connection between Newt Gunray and the Sith Lords. Neimoidians, the race of people that made up the Trade Federation, were notorious for being cowardly. There was an extremely high chance of them revealing to the Jedi everything they knew about the Sith, especially if they were backed into a corner. In retaliation, Plagueis and Sidious accelerated their plans, ordering the Trade Federation to kill the Jedi before any negotiations were to be conducted. Initially, the plan was merely to blockade Naboo. However, with the Jedi interfering, Sidious ordered the full-scale invasion of Naboo. The Sith Lords had hoped that the Trade Federation would do its part by killing the Jedi ambassadors. Meanwhile, the invasion of Naboo would force Amidala to sign a treaty that would allow the Trade Federation to completely own the planet's plasma reserves, making the Neimoidian occupation of Naboo completely legal. With the plan moving at a rate faster than ever, Plagueis believed that it was the will of the dark side that they finally reveal the existence of the Sith to the galaxy, to which Sidious replied that he would see to it that Darth Maul was ready for that revelation. Unsurprisingly to them, the Trade Federation failed to kill Jyn and Kenobi. The Jedi pair, meanwhile, rescued Queen Amidala and escaped the planet with her, much to the anger of both the Trade Federation and Sith. Sidious went as far as sending Darth Maul to go after Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi shortly after their escape from Naboo, believing that the Jedi stood no chance against his apprentice. While Sidious was manipulating the Naboo situation from both sides as a Sith Lord and as Senator Palpatine, Plagueis was accelerating another important part of the Grand Plan. He was in a political gathering hosted by Valorum. Several Jedi Masters were present, including Sidious, Yoda, and Mace Windu. Plagueis specifically targeted Sidious, preying on his fears of an impending civil war. The problem was that the Jedi Council was unwilling to listen to Deus's worries about war, even as the signs were already there. Plagueis tempted Deus with the possibility of an army that could defend the Republic from the inevitable civil war. He told him that the time was nigh because they needed to create the army as soon as possible to give the Republic a fighting chance when the fires of war finally broke out. 20 years ago, Deus was still more skeptical, but because it was now clear that conflicts within the Republic were showing signs of discord among different systems, he bought into Plagueis' idea that a growing darkness was indeed approaching. Plagueis then revealed the existence of the cloners on Kamino, information he wanted to share with Deus 2 decades ago. He claimed the cloners could grow an army in time for a war, and that he had the funds to finance the entire undertaking through Damask Holdings' vast assets. Deus was still hesitant to take action, but highly considered taking Plagueis' offer, not knowing that the Sith had been manipulating him the entire time. Chapter 10. The Arrival of the Chosen One. The Naboo crisis was ongoing when Palpatine learned of the existence of a very powerful Force-sensitive boy from Jedi Master Dooku. Dooku at this point had become a very good friend of his. The boy was Anakin Skywalker, a boy born into slavery on the outskirt planets of Tatooine, far from the Republic's influence and the Jedi Order's senses. He had been brought to Coruscant by Qui-Gon Jinn, who sensed Anakin's potential early on. Qui-Gon confirmed that Anakin's midichlorian count was unprecedented, even higher than the one of Master Yoda. It was believed that he was the chosen one the prophecy said was meant to bring balance to the Force. Thus, Qui-Gon wanted to train him to become a Jedi. Intrigued, Palpatine informed Plagueis of this revelation. The Chosen One had actually arrived. Sidious felt that they could use Anakin's natural talent, hoping he could use him to his advantage in the future. On the other hand, Plagueis legitimately feared the young Skywalker's existence, especially after learning that he was born on 41 BBY, a year after their failed attempt at manipulating the midichlorians to create life by flooding the galaxy with the dark side of the Force. In his mind, Anakin was not just a generational talent, but actually stood at a vergence in the Force. He became convinced that the Force, enraged by his unnatural attempt at usurping the Force's power to create life, retaliated by creating Skywalker as the prophesized Chosen One, meant to destroy the Sith and bring balance back to the Force. His theory was supported by the fact that Anakin was born without a father, an immaculate conception that seemed to have been willed by the Force itself out of revenge for Plagueis' hubris. Plagueis was familiar with the prophecy of the Chosen One. In fact, Hego Damask's very existence was the product of Darth Tenebris' desire to usurp the Chosen One's body. His former master manipulated the circumstances that led to his birth because he wanted to use Plagueis as his vessel before the coming of the Chosen One. But, unknown to both Tenebris and Plagueis, the Chosen One most likely came about as an indirect result of their attempts to meddle with the Force. Had Tenebris not brought about Plagueis' birth, Plagueis would not have existed to try to put the Force under his command. So, if the Moon Sith Lord was correct in believing that Anakin was the product of the Force's retaliation, the prophecy was directly tied to Plagueis' existence. That was why he feared Anakin's existence. But still, that did not stop him from wanting to meet the boy himself. On Coruscant, Plagueis snuck into Palpatine's suite where Anakin was staying. However, he didn't get a chance to meet him because Skywalker had just left the premises. This was the first time in his life that he realized the Force may have been working against him and the Grand Plan. He feared for the existence of the Sith, interpreting Anakin's existence as the Force's way of striking back at him and his apprentice for what they did a decade ago. So he shifted his priority. The goal was to prevent Anakin from becoming a Jedi. While that was happening, Amidala had decided to return to Naboo to liberate her people after putting forward a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum's reign to remove him from his post and elect a new Supreme Chancellor. Although this wasn't entirely planned for by the Sith, as they didn't anticipate the Senate already being willing to part with Valorum, they gladly took this opportunity. The Chancellor's seat was open, and none other than Palpatine was favored in contention to become the leader of the Republic. Everything they had been building towards for decades was falling in place. Now, the Naboo crisis wasn't of any use to them anymore. The Jedi accompanied the Queen back to Naboo and brought Anakin with them as he was denied to be trained as a Jedi by the Council. Right before their departure from Coruscant, Plagueis managed to catch a quick glimpse at the supposed Chosen One. Seeing him, even though from a distance and only for a split second, gave Plagueis a vision in the Force. He saw a figure in dark armor, a glimpse of Darth Vader himself. Plagueis realized that this boy would change the course of history. More than ever, he was determined to prevent the child from becoming a Jedi. So, just before Amidala and the Jedi arrived on Naboo, Plagueis ordered Sidious to have Darth Maul prioritize killing Qui-Gon Jinn, the man who defied the Jedi Council's will so that he could personally take Anakin under his wing. Sidious, meanwhile, also ordered Maul to kill Kenobi as insurance, because he knew that Obi-Wan would take Anakin as his Padawan if ever something were to happen to Qui-Gon. Chapter 11: The Tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Plagueis and Sidious were delighted that the Grand Plan was moving forward according to their expectations. Every puzzle piece set up to this point had fallen in place and acted as they had planned. Valorum had been ousted from the Chancellorship, with Palpatine on the verge of becoming the Chancellor of the Republic. Meanwhile, he was certain that the Kaminoans were soon to start their work to create the clones that would bring the demise of the Jedi Order. On the night before Palpatine's inauguration to become Chancellor, the Master and Apprentice celebrated in the Moon's penthouse suite on Coruscant, drowning themselves in Celestin wine. Plagueis was at his happiest, for he knew that they were now closer than ever to fulfilling the Grand Plan. He even allowed his personal security to take the night off, because he believed that his apprentice would be enough protection. On Plagueis' request, Palpatine rehearsed the speech he was going to give to the Senate the next day, correcting him at various points. The relationship between Plagueis and Sidious was, at first glance, a flourishing one. When Plagueis took Palpatine in as his apprentice, he told him this was the end of the Rule of Two, because he and Sidious would be working in harmony without any secrets between them. For the longest time, Plagueis thought he could completely trust his apprentice, because he never saw any sparks of betrayal in Palpatine's eyes. But what he didn't know was that Sidious was far more selfish than he thought. Palpatine never intended to share power. Although he needed Plagueis up until this point, there was no way he'd have Plagueis be a co-chancellor behind the curtains. Plagueis drank so much wine that he started to sleep. For the first time in over 20 years, Plagueis was sleeping, as he had denied himself of that. At first, Sidious didn't think much about his master being in a vulnerable state. He was about to leave Plagueis alone in his deep and intoxicated slumber. But as soon as he was about to call it a night, Sidious heard the dark side calling out to him to kill his master. This was the very same situation Plagueis found himself in decades ago, when he heard the dark side telling him to kill Tenebris in his most vulnerable state. Without any hesitation holding him back, Sidious turned around and shot a volley of Force lightning at the Dark Lord laying there in his sleep. Palpatine mocked his master for his moment of vulnerability as he poured all his malicious intent into his actions, eventually destroying Plagueis' breathing device and further weakening the Sith Lord. Before that, Plagueis never thought death would eventually come for him. He had mastered the art of manipulating midichlorians to such a degree that he could bring Darth Venomous back from death repeatedly during his experiments. However, the irony was that he never stopped to think whether or not he could prevent himself from dying. As Sidious continued throwing more lightning at him, Plagueis tried to fight back, even conjuring up a small force storm to try to protect himself. But the alcoholic intoxication was too much even for one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He eventually succumbed to suffocation. As he died, Plagueis released an explosion of dark side energy as he knocked Sidious out and rippled through the entire planet. Hemo Damask, Darth Plagueis, Dark Lord of the Sith, was dead. Sidious was now the uncontested Sith Master and most powerful person in the galaxy. Epilogue. As Sidious stood there, having killed his master, he felt no remorse. He thanked Plagueis for his teachings and his part in implementing the Grand Plan of the Sith, but also cursed him for manipulating him into killing his parents all these years ago. On Naboo, Maul succeeded in killing Jyn, but fell at the hands of Kenobi. Palpatine was inaugurated the next day and would learn of Maul's loss, which occurred at the same time as his victory over Plagueis. During Qui-Gon's funeral, Obi-Wan promised Anakin that he would become a Jedi, as willed by his fallen master. Meanwhile, Qui-Gon's death eventually convinced Dooku to leave the Jedi and take his seat as Serenu's new count. He would soon thereafter join Sidious and become his apprentice. Sidious, meanwhile, decided that an army for the Republic was necessary, the words of Hego Damask echoing in his mind. He approached the Kaminoans and commissioned the creation of a clone army for the Republic behind the backs of both the Jedi Order and the Galactic Senate by using the funds he received from Damask Holdings. Plagueis unfortunately never saw the fruition of his work. The very vision that forced Darth Tenebris to abandon his quest of taking over his former apprentice's body had proven to be correct. His seclusion in the last 20 years also made him become a forgotten figure in the wider galaxy, as he was out of the public eye for as long as most people remembered. Darth Sidious eventually grew to be more powerful than Darth Plagueis ever was. But while his former master supposedly taught him everything he knew, Sidious never fully mastered the ability to cheat death by manipulating midichlorians to the same degree of his master. The final legacy that Plagueis would lay would be in Palpatine's manipulation attempts to turn the Chosen One to the dark side. By using his master's attempts to create life as a story, he was able to convince Anakin that such a feat was possible, ultimately leading the young Jedi to become a Sith Lord at Palpatine's side. Indeed, it was ironic that the being obsessed with cheating death and living eternally could have succeeded if it wasn't for the Sith's nature to consolidate all power to themselves. Plagueis going against that rule ultimately led to his own demise, despite all his wisdom in the Force. That was the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Sometime before 147 BBY, the Sith Lord Darth Tenebris used his vast intellect to contemplate the future of the Sith. He foresaw the emergence of a pivotal figure, Palpatine, who would signal the end of many established orders and govern eternally. However, blinded by his own ambitions, he mistakenly believed this destiny was meant for himself. Chapter 1. Early Life on Naboo. Sheev Palpatine began life on the serene planet of Naboo. The House of Palpatine stood among Naboo's wealthiest and most influential families, deeply connected to the planet's political elite. Born as the eldest of several siblings, Sheev grew up in the huge Palpatine family estate. His father, Kosinga Palpatine, was a domineering and overbearing figure who valued prestige and legacy above all else. Throughout his youth, Sheev attended some of the galaxy's most prestigious academies. Sheev's keen mind grasped complex concepts far beyond his years, particularly Naboo's political system. This understanding led to a deep dissatisfaction with his father. He saw Kosinga as a man of limited vision, who was simply content with a small provincial role rather than striving for true power. This complacency infuriated Sheev, who believed House Palpatine could and should play a far greater role in Naboo's politics and beyond. Palpatine grew up with an overwhelming sense of superiority, believing he could get away with anything, even murder. No matter the trouble he found himself in, his father, Kosinga Palpatine, always used his wealth and influence to bail him out. This constant indulgence fostered a deep belief in his own superiority, even over those closest to him, including his family. Chapter 2. Darth Plagueis the Wise. Hego Damask was the head of the powerful Damask Holdings, one of the galaxy's most powerful and influential financiers and political lobbyists. However, beneath this public persona lay Darth Plagueis, a Sith Lord who sought to reshape the galaxy according to the Sith's ancient vision. The year was 65 BBY. Naboo was holding new monarchical elections. Kosinga Palpatine, a staunch isolationist, supported the conservative royal candidate opposing Bon Topolo, who wanted to open Naboo to galactic trade. Unlike Kosinga, Sheev envisioned Naboo embracing a larger role in galactic affairs, where its resources and influence could secure greater power and influence. This ideological clash deepened his disillusionment with his father, whom he saw as incapable of advancing House Palpatine's position or appreciating Naboo's potential on the galactic stage. Acting on his own ambitions and defying his father, Sheev supported Topolo's campaign by leaking confidential information to them. Sheev's actions did not go unnoticed by Plagueis. Through his corporate empire, he promised to support Topolo's campaign in exchange for exclusive transport rights to the plasma. Plagueis, intrigued by the audacity of Sheev's defiance against his own father, arranged to meet him. Upon their first meeting, unable to sense Palpatine in the Force, Plagueis was intrigued by the mystery surrounding him. Henceforth, the relationship between the two deepened as Plagueis positioned himself as a mentor, exploiting Palpatine's hatred for his domineering father. He framed himself as a kindred spirit, someone who understood the boy's struggles and offered liberation from them. The rift between father and son widened when Kosinga discovered Sheev's close friendship with Damask, as he was well aware that Damask was a big supporter of Topolo. Alarmed by the potential threat Damask posed and enraged by Sheev's defiance, Kosinga planned to exile his 17-year-old son. This led to a climactic confrontation aboard the family yacht, during which Kosinga and Sheev each revealed their hatred for each other, Kosinga even admitting he had wanted to kill him since infancy. The revelation unleashed years of pent-up hatred and rage within Sheev. Drawing on the dark side of the Force, Sheev slaughtered his entire family and their guards in a fit of unrestrained fury. "Tell me what happened," asked Plagueis.
Palpatine raised his clawed hands. I executed them with these, and with the power of my mind. I became a storm, Magister. A weapon strong enough to warp bulkheads and hurl bodies across cabin spaces. I was death itself.
After this confession, Plagueis went on to erase all evidence of the murders, allowing Palpatine to sever ties with his past. This defining act convinced Plagueis that Palpatine was worthy of joining the Sith Order. Shortly afterward, Plagueis formally initiated him as his apprentice, bestowing the name Darth Sidious, which was a reflection of Palpatine's cunning, ambition, and insidious nature. Topolo went on to ascend the throne of Naboo as planned, and the Plasma Reserve's control was sold to the Trade Federation, a powerful company that controlled basically all trade in the galaxy. Chapter 3. Becoming a Sith Lord. Once Palpatine pledged himself as Plagueis' apprentice, the real work began. Training under a Sith Lord was no mere academic exercise. It was designed to test and hone the apprentice's body, mind, and soul. Plagueis introduced Palpatine to Sith philosophy. He painted the Jedi as naive and ineffective, protectors of a broken and corrupt republic. Darth Sidious' training under Darth Plagueis focused on developing his Force abilities, combat skills, and political acumen. Plagueis pushed himself to the brink with deprivation of food, water, and sleep, using anger, hate, and desperation as tools to transform him into a true Sith, ensuring that his apprentice would either emerge stronger or perish, for in the Sith tradition, only the strongest survived. He introduced Palpatine to the Sith Grand Plan, a way for them to get to dominate the galaxy. What exactly was the plan about? Well, it sought to take control of the Republic and destroy the Jedi that sought to protect it. They sought to achieve this by infiltrating the Republic's highest spheres and then slowly accumulating the power towards a single individual. Henceforth, they'd work together to advance this plan, but at this moment, a lot had yet to be done. As a first step, Palpatine began his political career. He started as an ambassador in the Apprentice Legislator program, where he slowly worked his way up. Despite his ambition and intelligence, Palpatine faced setbacks early in his political career as he tried to gain a name for himself by applying for numerous elections and losing a lot of these. However, his humble way of dealing with these losses did gain him sympathizers within the Naboo government. This resulted in him gaining the ambassador role under the then reigning Senator Kim of Naboo. Chapter 4. Darth Maul. During his apprenticeship under Darth Plagueis, Sidious went to Dathomir to learn more about the dark side of the Force. There, he was entrusted with an infant Zabrak. gifted to him by the child's night sister mother. The child would come to be known as Darth Maul. Known for their resilience and high tolerance for pain, Zabraks were a natural fit for Sith training, though nothing could have prepared young Maul for the relentless brutality of Sidious's training methods. From an early age, Sidious shaped Maul's worldview and trained him to become a Sith assassin. After conducting a final test with Maul where he had to survive in a desolate jungle with his bare hands, Sidious pronounced him ready. At that moment, Maul was no longer a mere apprentice. He had earned the title of Sith Lord and was henceforth known as Darth Maul. The nomination of Maul to Sith Lord was kept from Plagueis as it would have made his master suspicious. All Plagueis knew Maul for was a tool for the Sith, an assassin that blindly would follow through on their bidding whenever needed. Chapter 5. Palpatine, Senator of Naboo. Around 52 BBY, Palpatine capitalized on the growing dissatisfaction in Naboo over King Topolo's trade deals with the Trade Federation, which benefited the Federation at the expense of the people. While publicly supporting Topolo, Palpatine subtly criticized the king, positioning himself as a reformer who understood the common people's grievances. With his popularity rising, Palpatine, under the guidance of his master Plagueis, orchestrated the assassination of Naboo's senator, Vidar Kim, to further destabilize the political landscape. The dramatic public murder allowed Palpatine to step in as a reluctant Senate candidate, gaining support from both Topolo's faction and the disillusioned citizens of Naboo. Their plan worked. Palpatine won the senator race with ease and was now in a more powerful position, which allowed him to gain access to the Senate in Coruscant. In the Senate on Coruscant, he portrayed himself as a senator from the small provincial world he came from. His modest demeanor disarmed potential rivals, and he avoided the ambitious committees and advisory boards that could have made him a target of scrutiny, maintaining a good image among all senators. During his free time, he focused on writing and delivering thoughtful speeches and essays. These writings became popular among students of political and military science, earning him a reputation as a principled thinker. These actions gained him a lot of allies within the Republic spheres, and he quickly started growing in popularity just like on Naboo. In his early sessions in the Galactic Senate, Palpatine quickly dispelled initial doubts about his effectiveness and political skills as a newly elected senator. His authoritative yet balanced and reserved demeanor earned him widespread approval among his fellow senators. His ability to objectively analyze both sides of a conflict and propose practical solutions quickly made him one of the most prominent and influential senators. Over time, Palpatine garnered the support of many politicians and key business leaders, solidifying his growing network of allies. Chapter 6. Setting the Stage. The Sith's plan was working. Palpatine was becoming an influential figure on Coruscant. Plagueis, as Higo Damask, was his supporter with the financial backing behind it. However, Palpatine's growing popularity did call political rivals into action, as some didn't approve of Higo Damask's influence on the Senate through Palpatine. Damask, due to this, got targeted for assassination, and they didn't like his influence on Palpatine. The assassination attempt failed, but left Plagueis severely scarred, requiring him to use a breathing device henceforth. The failed assassination led Plagueis to give the reins of advancing the Sith Grand Plan entirely to Palpatine in order to focus more on his experimentations with the midichlorians. He started living extremely secluded, rarely ever appearing publicly, being more obsessed than ever to achieve immortality. Meanwhile, Palpatine's influence in the Republic was growing as he gained more and more high-profile allies within the Republic. One such ally would be none other than Senator Finis Valorum, who became a close friend of his during their time on Coruscant. When Valorum later went on to become the Supreme Chancellor, Palpatine was a trusted ally and advisor of Valorum. This position was perfect for Palpatine as he had direct access to the strongest figure in the galaxy and could now lay the foundations to further destabilize the Republic structure. One major suggestion he was able to get Valorum to pass was a bill for the taxation of the free trade routes, knowing fully well that the Trade Federation would oppose it fully. Seeing the tension raised by the proposed bill, a meeting on Eriadu was held to hear out the opposing voices of the Trade Federation. During the summit, security droids, secretly arranged by Sidious, killed 6 of the 7 Trade Federation Directorate members, leaving the Trade Federation's leadership completely desolated. The Senate proceeded to pass the taxation laws. Killing the Trade Federation leaders had 2 reasons. Firstly was for the Senate to pass the taxation laws, but more importantly, he was able to place Newt Gunray as the leader of the Trade Federation. Gunray's rise within the Federation had been carefully engineered by Sidious himself. By following Sidious's every command, Gunray eventually was able to secure this extremely powerful position. His ascension to the role of Viceroy was entirely due to Sidious's influence and would have been impossible without it. Thus, he was in Sidious's debt and was easily manipulated henceforth. Next order of things, Palpatine arranged for several billion credits to be funneled through the extremely shady Bank of Argao into the accounts of House Valorum. The scandal critically undermined Valorum's already fragile grip on power further, leaving him with very few friends left in the Republic's government. Palpatine's and Plagueis' plan for him to become the highest leader of the Republic was all but set. The Trade Federation had Gunray in place at the Trade Federation that followed their every command. Palpatine was extremely popular in Coruscant, and Chancellor Valorum's power was slipping. One final puzzle piece was left to be solved. Palpatine and Plagueis needed more influence on Naboo's throne, as the current king started opposing them. Plagueis took it upon himself to ensure the king's death. This series of events ultimately led to the coronation of a very young Padme Naberrie, later known as Queen Amidala, as the monarch of Naboo. A child on the throne, what an easy pawn to be manipulated into the bidding of the Sith. With everything in place now, Sidious went on to convince Gunray to blockade Naboo. The reasoning given to Gunray, to show you how manipulative Palpatine truly was that it was the home planet of Senator Palpatine, who was the main culprit behind getting these trade route taxations. The blockade should be a demonstration of power for the Trade Federation. Gunray did as asked, and the events to follow should be quite familiar to all the viewers. Chapter 7. The Rise of Chancellor Palpatine. The Trade Federation swiftly fortified its presence in the Naboo system, amassing a fleet of battleships to enforce a strict blockade. They sealed off the planet, choking its once thriving trade. Incoming ships were informed that the blockade was in response to the Republic's illegal trade taxes. The Sith's plan for the Naboo blockade was to increase Palpatine's chances at the Chancellorship by undermining Valorum even more, showing how he couldn't take decisive action and wasn't fit as a leader. These should accumulate in the Senate to take the Chancellorship away from Valorum and vote him down. For the next month, the Senate engaged in fierce debate, but failed to take decisive action. The Senate's inaction made Valorum seem weak, a perception Palpatine encouraged by advising Queen Amidala to stay patient and let the Senate come to a conclusion before taking any action of her own. However, Amidala proved less compliant than Palpatine anticipated. Frustrated by the Senate's inaction, she contacted Valorum directly. Valorum resolved to call a special session of the Senate to address the blockade. To strengthen his position, he decided to send Jedi ambassadors Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi to Naboo, hoping their presence would intimidate the Trade Federation and demonstrate his resolve. To further escalate the crisis, Sidious and Plagueis decided an invasion was necessary. When Chancellor Valorum secretly sent Jedi ambassadors Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi to negotiate with the Trade Federation, Sidious feigned outrage and ordered Gunray to invade Naboo and eliminate the Jedi. Despite efforts to kill them, the Jedi survived, rescued Queen Amidala, and escaped to Coruscant. After escaping Naboo, Amidala's damaged ship landed on Tatooine for repairs. Sidious dispatched Darth Maul to capture Amidala and eliminate the Jedi in order to force her to sign the treaty, to make the invasion of Naboo legal. By making the invasion legal, it would have shown just how powerless the Republic Senate and their Chancellor Valorum really was. Although Maul tracked them down, he failed to accomplish his mission. Palpatine, initially planning to use Naboo's occupation to gradually remove Chancellor Valorum, saw an opportunity when Amidala unexpectedly arrived on Coruscant. Recognizing her urgency, Palpatine manipulated her into calling for a vote of no confidence in Valorum, bypassing a slower legal process. Amidala, frustrated with Valorum's ineffectiveness and the Trade Federation stalling, trusted Palpatine's advice and prioritized Naboo's situation. The vote swiftly gained support, leading to Valorum's downfall and the collapse of his government. As Chancellor Valorum's fall became imminent, the Senate divided between three candidates for his replacement. Palpatine, having built alliances through months of lobbying and with the help of his mentor Plagueis, who manipulated the process by assassinating key senators, emerged as a compromise candidate. In the election, Palpatine's rivals failed to secure enough votes, as recent killings of opposing senators also tilted the balance in his favor. The Senate, eager to avoid deadlock, rallied behind Palpatine. With overwhelming support, he was elected Chancellor, vowing to restore the Republic's former glory and unite its fractured people, a promise that obviously masked his true ambitions. Chapter 8: The Death of Darth Plagueis. Before his election as Chancellor, Palpatine met Jedi Master Dooku, a Jedi he was introduced to by Plagueis. As they shared a lot of common viewpoints, a friendship had formed between the two over the years. Dooku revealed that Qui-Gon Jinn had brought a boy named Anakin Skywalker to the Jedi Council, believed to be the Chosen One. Palpatine informed Plagueis of this, who became alarmed, fearing that Anakin's existence might be the Force's retaliation against his experimentations with the Force. To thwart Anakin's potential threat, Plagueis ordered Palpatine to ensure Qui-Gon's death, hoping this would prevent Anakin's training. Palpatine did as asked and sent Darth Maul to confront Qui-Gon on Naboo. At this point, the outcome of the battle on Naboo was irrelevant to him, though. He had set it with the target to undermine Valorum to achieve Chancellorship. Even though it did not entirely transpire as he had planned it, he had achieved his target. The last obstacle to his own domination of the galaxy was his master, Darth Plagueis. Plagueis had intended to serve as co-chancellor, effectively controlling Palpatine's decisions. However, Palpatine never had any intention of sharing power. Now that Plagueis was no longer useful, Sidious decided to eliminate him once and for all. On the night of the election, Palpatine and Plagueis attended a performance at the Galactic Opera House, then celebrated at Plagueis' luxurious penthouse on Coruscant. After drinking a lot of wine to celebrate Palpatine's victory, Plagueis fell into a deep sleep. Seizing the opportunity of Plagueis' vulnerability, Palpatine unleashed a surge of Force lightning at his master, disabling Plagueis' respirator mask. While the Dark Lord slowly suffocated, Sidious expressed his gratitude for Plagueis' teachings, but also lashed out at him for manipulating him into murdering his family. As Plagueis died, Palpatine felt a powerful shift in the Force, which he believed marked his ascension as the Sith'Ari, the prophesied Sith leader. He vowed to remain vigilant and never let his guard down, unlike Plagueis, whose fatal mistake had been a moment of unconsciousness. The path was now set for him to be the Dark Lord of the Sith and being the sole controller of his destiny to rule the galaxy. Chapter 9: Chancellor for the Republic, 32 BBY to 24 BBY. After the Battle of Naboo, Palpatine realized he had lost his apprentice Darth Maul on Naboo. However, learning that a young Anakin Skywalker had played a pivotal role in the victory did ease his anger a bit. The Jedi Council had decided to train Anakin as a Jedi, with Obi-Wan Kenobi as his mentor. Although he wasn't sure yet what to make of it, Palpatine promised Anakin during the celebration that his career would be watched with great interest, a promise he intended to keep. But Darth Maul's untimely defeat was a bit of a predicament for Palpatine. To advance his plan of dividing and conquering the Republic, he needed a capable apprentice to execute his biddings. His attention thus fell on his longtime friend, Count Dooku. After Qui-Gon Jinn's death, Dooku left the Jedi Order, disillusioned with their inability to address the Republic's decay. Palpatine, aware of Dooku's resentment toward the Order, as well as having fostered a friendship with him for years, revealed his true identity to him. Dooku, already inclined toward the dark side, joined him rather happily as Darth Tyrannus. Together, they laid the groundwork for the pivotal next step in the Sith's Grand Plan. During the first 4-year term as Chancellor, Palpatine was mainly focused on governing the Republic and having Dooku set the pieces for the Sith into place. He also fostered relationships with different powerful allies, Mas Amedda, his vice chair and Senate Speaker, being one of them. Mas Amedda also becomes one of the few people aware of Palpatine's identity as Sidious. In 28 BBY, Palpatine secured re-election as Chancellor without much opposition. Thus, his second term as Chancellor started without any notable interference. Chapter 10: The Clone Army. Years before Palpatine became Chancellor, Darth Plagueis and him had planned a civil war to weaken the Jedi and the Republic. They devised that there was a necessity to have an army to be created in the name of the Republic. Sidious at first wanted to use the army to fight against the Jedi head-on. However, Plagueis thought it would be better to have the army fight alongside the Jedi. As head of Damask Holdings, the funds to pay for the clone army could be stemmed by Plagueis. However, it would have raised too much suspicion if the wealthy power broker of his alter ego, Higo Damask, was to order a clone army for the Republic. Thus, to keep the Sith's involvement hidden, Plagueis went on to target Master Sidious, who had voiced concerns about the Republic's instability. He was an advocate for the Republic needing its own standing army to defeat its systems. Plagueis took advantage of Sidious' stance, and after several meetups, Sidious agreed to create a clone army in his name. the Damask Holdings providing the necessary funds for the Kaminoans to start their work. Sidious left the Order and went on to secretly commission the clone army for the Republic using the funds from Damask Holdings. To ensure the army remained hidden until the time was right, Dooku on Sidious's order killed Sidious and took control of the cloning project. He erased Kamino and other key systems from the Jedi archives to ensure the project's secrecy. Dooku's next task was to select a template for the clones. After trials, he chose Jango Fett, a skilled Mandalorian mercenary. The clone army was breeding, ready to be deployed once the last pieces were set in place. By the time the clone army was ready, Palpatine had almost completed his 2 terms as Chancellor, but the stage was now set for the final phase of his plan. Throughout his rise to power, Palpatine and Dooku had sowed chaos across the galaxy. By manipulating the Senate, criminal groups, and financial institutions, they fueled resentment among the Outer and Mid-Rim worlds, who were suffering from corruption and exploitation by the core worlds. As these systems grew increasingly disillusioned, the call for a split from the Republic grew louder. All it required was a spark to ignite the growing tensions. This spark would turn out to be Dooku, the charismatic, well-spoken leader to bring all these dissatisfied worlds together. Chapter 11: The Confederacy of Independent Systems. Under Palpatine's guidance, Count Dooku united several commercial groups, including the Trade Federation, into the Confederacy of Independent Systems in 24 BBY, forming the Separatist movement. These organizations pledged their vast armies to Dooku, giving the CIS the power to challenge the Republic, making it a significant threat to the Senate. Palpatine specifically ordered Dooku's creation of this separatist government near the end of his term as Chancellor. The rise of the separatist threat led the Senate to grant him an indefinite term to manage the separatist crisis, effectively canceling the 24 BBY election. As the separatist crisis escalated, Palpatine staged a PR stunt in 22 BBY, broadcasting a 12-minute address to the galaxy offering peace to Count Dooku. He portrayed himself as the wronged party, willing to negotiate and hold peace talks despite the war's growing inevitability. But of course, he and Dooku had already planned that there would be no response, making the separatists appear unreasonable. To further strengthen his position, Palpatine orchestrated a series of assassinations on Republic senators in 22 BBY, which were blamed on the separatists, fueling the call for a military. When it came time to vote, the Senate had to approve both the Military Creation Act and the voluntary surrender of their legislative powers to Palpatine. The vote was delayed, however, by a failed assassination attempt on Senator Amidala, a vocal opponent of the Military Creation Act. Her opposition to the act made her a target of Palpatine, both to silence her and to appease Newt Gunray, who harbored a personal grudge against her after his defeat at the Battle of Naboo. However, as she escaped back to Naboo, things still turned in Palpatine's favor. Obi-Wan Kenobi had managed to track Jango Fett to Geonosis, where he uncovered the Separatist hidden droid army. As fate would have it, Kenobi was captured by the Geonosians, but he could report back fully about the creation of the droid army. Kenobi's discovery set off a chain of events that Palpatine had long anticipated. The Republic, now facing a confirmed threat of full-scale war, with a droid army prepared for attack, found itself in dire need of a military to defend its interests. Palpatine seized the opportunity to use the Jedi's discovery of the Separatist army as proof of the threat posed by Dooku. During a late-night conference, Palpatine and Mas Amedda met with the Jedi Council and the Loyalist Committee, where it became clear the Senate could not approve the use of the clone army before the Separatist attack. Amedda, likely acting on Palpatine's suggestion, proposed that Palpatine be granted emergency war powers, enabling him to use the army immediately. Jar Jar Binks, representing Amidala during her absence, agreed to propose it in front of the Senate. During the hearing, he unexpectedly proposed a motion for emergency powers, astonishing the Senate. His proposal, seen as Amidala's position, gained widespread support, leading to Palpatine's victory. The Senate, believing Binks was acting in line with Amidala's wishes, approved the motion, allowing Palpatine to declare war. Palpatine's speech reassured the Senate that he'd lay down the power granted after the war and go on to live out his life on Naboo afterwards. However, as we all know, his promise of peace was a lie. He quickly solidified the clone army as the Republic's military, and the troops alongside the Jedi landed on Geonosis, thus starting the Clone Wars against the Separatist droid army. Chapter 12: The Clone Wars. After the Republic's victory at Geonosis, Darth Tyrannus returned to Coruscant and reported to his master, Darth Sidious, that their plot was now in motion, with the start of the Clone Wars. Sidious expressed satisfaction. The war, while presented as a Republic effort to suppress the Separatists, was in reality a war waged by Sidious against the Republic itself. As the war escalated, Palpatine's popularity soared. With citizens rallying around him as the protector of the Republic, Palpatine also learned of Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala's secret marriage, using this knowledge to manipulate Anakin toward the dark side in the future. Meanwhile, Palpatine continued consolidating power, passing laws that further eroded the Senate's authority, and secretly controlled both sides of the war, manipulating different events to ensure the conflict would continue for years. Throughout the Clone Wars, several unforeseen challenges surfaced that Palpatine had to deal with subsequently. This all while also keeping his greater goal in mind to push the young Anakin Skywalker closer to the dark side of the Force. In one incident, Dooku, while loyal to Palpatine, did train a very powerful Sith assassin in the figure of Asajj Ventress, which at some point could have been threatening to him. So he chose to test Dooku by having him kill her. Although Dooku failed to kill her, he guaranteed Dooku's loyalty through it as Dooku cut any ties with her. A completely unforeseen precedent was the re-emergence of Darth Maul, his former apprentice. Although thought to have died on Naboo years ago, he re-emerged and started building a criminal empire alongside his brother, Savage Opress. While at first just a nuisance, Maul's action eventually led him to become the ruler of Mandalore. Sidious saw that it had gone too far and decided to interfere himself to take Maul out of the equation. He had Masameda prepare his personal shuttle to Mandalore, and in a quick duel with the brothers, killed Savage and took Maul prisoner. The reason for not killing Maul was in order to pull the far more powerful Night Sister Mother Talzin out of hiding, the only being powerful enough to potentially challenge his power. The plan worked. Maul escaped and went on to call for Mother Talzin's help. In a final confrontation, Sidious, Dooku, and Grievous engaged Maul and Mother Talzin, ultimately killing Talzin. Maul escaped once again to Mandalore and had little left and was no longer of any concern to Sidious now. The dark side was stronger than ever, and Sidious's ultimate victory was right upon them. Another event that almost exposed the Grand Plan was the malfunctioning of one of the clones to execute the Clone Order 66 prematurely. This led to a series of investigations where the ARC Trooper 5s even discovered the reason for the inhibitor chips planted in the clones, these being a plot to follow through on the order to eliminate the Jedi once the time has come for it. Fives was ultimately killed though and framed as a lunatic by Palpatine and the Kaminoans, thus the true nature of the inhibitor chips remained a mystery to the Jedi. 3 years of brutality and battle all accumulated in the following outset. The Jedi Order was in disarray, with a lot of members questioning their role as generals in the battles. The life toll of the war was countless, and Anakin Skywalker, the prophesied chosen one that Plagueis had feared, had become a war hero. But he was getting more and more accustomed to the dark side, pushing his limits in the morality of how far one can go to achieve victory. Palpatine sensed the end of the war was drawing near. The things the war was set to achieve were set. Under the guise of Sidious, he ordered General Grievous to navigate a hidden hyperlane through the treacherous deep core, and launch a direct assault on Coruscant itself. Now, all that's left of this meticulously crafted plan was its grand finale. Chapter 13. Revenge of the Sith. As the end of the Clone Wars approached, Palpatine orchestrated his own kidnapping at the hands of General Grievous. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, having been ordered to rescue him, found Palpatine imprisoned on Grievous's flagship, the Invisible Hand. A duel ensued with Count Dooku, which was orchestrated by Sidious to test Anakin's susceptibility to the dark side. Dooku engaged Anakin and Obi-Wan, believing he would join Sidious in converting Anakin to the dark side, and rule as the Sith Master alongside Sidious. But it was only seconds before his death that Dooku figured he was ultimately betrayed by Sidious. Following Dooku's death, Sidious contacted Grievous, instructing him to relocate the Separatist Council to Mustafar and hinting at a more powerful apprentice to come. The next day, Palpatine passed a new security act through the Senate. The amendment officially transferred control of the Jedi High Council from the Senate to the Chancellor, granting him the constitutional authority to disband the Jedi Order. It also stripped the Jedi and the Senate of any oversight over the Republic's military, placing the Chancellor in direct command and declaring him Supreme Commander of the Republic military. The Jedi became increasingly wary of Palpatine, concerned about the implications of his near-absolute control over the Republic. The fact that Palpatine was willing to accept powers granting him ultimate authority over the Jedi was deeply troubling to the Order. This didn't unsettle Palpatine though, as he sought to further strengthen his bond with Anakin by appointing him as his personal representative on the Jedi High Council, further unsettling the Jedi, who saw it as an overreach of his power. Although Anakin gained a seat on the council due to this, he was denied the rank of Jedi Master.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of Master.
What?
The war, along with a Jedi's involvement in it, had already sown seeds of distrust in Anakin's mind, especially after witnessing several Jedi, including his own Padawan Ahsoka, leave the Order out of disillusionment. This distrust was further compounded when Obi-Wan revealed that the Council had approved Anakin's appointment to the Council primarily to spy on Palpatine, a task Anakin saw as treasonous but reluctantly accepted. Palpatine, with direct access to Anakin now, continued to manipulate him. He convinced Anakin that the Jedi were holding him back because of his power. When Anakin shared his fears about Padme dying in childbirth, Palpatine, claiming to have knowledge that could save Padme, persuaded Anakin to consider the Sith's teachings on life preservation. In a critical moment, Anakin realized that Palpatine was Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord they had been searching for. Palpatine confirmed this and tempted Anakin to join the Sith. Though Anakin briefly considered killing Palpatine, he chose to report him to the Jedi Council instead. Anakin, struggling with inner turmoil, informed Master Windu of Palpatine's true personality, and was ordered by Mace Windu to remain in the Jedi Council chamber while Windu and 3 other Masters, Saesee Tiin, Agan Kolar, and Kit Fisto, went to arrest Palpatine. Upon their arrival, Palpatine, awaiting them, immediately attacked. He quickly killed Tiin, Kolar, and Fisto, leaving Windu to duel him alone. Windu's mastery of Vapad, a unique lightsaber style, allowed him to counter Sidious's dark aura. After an intense battle, Windu disarmed and subdued Sidious. However, Anakin's sudden arrival turned the tide. Right before Windu could kill Palpatine, Anakin decided that his attachment to his wife Padme was too great, and that he couldn't have Palpatine be killed, being the potentially only way to save her. He cut off Windu's sword arm with his lightsaber, leaving him open to Sidious's Force lightning. Sidious then quickly kills Windu and solidifies Anakin's turn to the dark side. Sidious had never been this close to death before, although he had planned it as part of his final scheme in order to get Anakin to turn to the dark side. With Mace Windu dead, Sidious told a desperate Anakin Skywalker, now isolated and unable to return to the Jedi Order, that they could save Padme together. Consumed by desperation and guilt, Anakin surrendered to the dark side, kneeling before Sidious and pledging his loyalty. Sidious named him Darth Vader, marking his complete betrayal of the Jedi. With this, Sidious now had his star pupil, which he had groomed for since the invasion on Naboo, the Chosen One, set to bring balance to the Force, now turned to join the Sith. To prove his loyalty, Darth Vader carried out Operation Nightfall, leading to the 501st Legion to massacre the Jedi at their temple. Vader slaughtered everyone in the temple, Jedi Masters, Padawans, and even the younglings. 1,000 years of planning had culminated in this. What Darth Bane had started with implementing the Rule of Two has come to fruition. The final act of the Grand Plan,
Execute Order 66,
was enacted. The clones, who had fought bravely and full-heartedly alongside their Jedi generals for years in the Clone Wars, turned on the Jedi and executed them in cold blood. Almost every Jedi in the galaxy was killed. The revenge of the Sith and Sidious's victory were absolute. After issuing Order 66, Sidious personally visited the Jedi Temple to witness his triumph. In the Room of 1,000 Fountains, he found Vader eliminating the last defenders. Pleased with his apprentice's ruthless efficiency, Sidious praised Vader, declaring his skills unrivaled among the Sith. He then instructed Vader to complete his next mission, eliminating the leaders of the Separatist Council to secure the Empire's control. The Separatist leaders, hiding on Mustafar under Sidious's false promises of reward, awaited further instructions. During a report from Newt Gunray, Sidious cryptically assured them his new apprentice, Darth Vader, would take care of them. Keeping the channel open, Sidious watched as Vader arrived. The Separatists greeted Vader warmly, only for him to ignite his blade and begin a massacre. Sidious observed with satisfaction as the leaders, including Gunray, were systematically slaughtered. He thought back to a moment 13 years before, where he had remarked to Darth Maul how happy a day it would be when he no longer needed the Neimoidians and their ilk. Finally, Vader carried out Sidious's last order, deactivating the droid armies. A signal broadcast across the galaxy shut down the Separatist forces, officially ending the Clone Wars. The manufactured conflict had served its purpose. The CIS was no longer necessary. Chapter 14. The Birth of the Galactic Empire. The deed had been done. The Jedi were no longer a threat. Palpatine called a special Senate session to announce the Jedi Rebellion, presenting his disfigured face as a symbol of sacrifice for the Republic. Palpatine informed the Senate of the Jedi's alleged plan not only to assassinate him, but also to overthrow the Senate. He accused the Jedi of using puppet senators, which were conveniently those in opposition to him, to foster the government's corruption. He claimed they had orchestrated the separatist movement through Count Dooku and commissioned the clone army through Sidious, all to stage a sham war designed to weaken the Republic. According to Palpatine, this grand conspiracy aimed to position the Jedi Council to seize more power openly, solidifying their treachery in the Senate's eyes. When Palpatine revealed his plan to maintain emergency powers and reorganize the Republic, the Senate, cowed by fear and seduced by promises of peace, voted unanimously to support him. Armed guards and political pressure silenced dissent, forcing Bail Organa and Mon Mothma to pretend support to stay safe, deeming they could do more good by living to see another day than being dead. The Empire was born, and nothing was going to stop it at this point. Chapter 15. The Last Stand of the Jedi Order. Obi-Wan and Yoda discovered Anakin's betrayal, learning he and his troops had massacred everyone in the Jedi Temple. Despite his reluctance, Obi-Wan was sent to confront Anakin on Mustafar, while Yoda challenged Emperor Palpatine in the Senate building. The duel between Yoda and Sidious showcased both their extraordinary mastery of the Force and lightsaber combat. Initially evenly matched, with every clash of their blades, Sidious grew more frustrated and unsettled, surprised by the Jedi Master's skill. Yoda's focus and expertise proved too much for Sidious, who found himself increasingly overwhelmed. The tide shifted further when Sidious lost his lightsaber, forcing him to rely solely on the Force to fend off Yoda's relentless assault, blasting Yoda's lightsaber away with his Force lightning. Two embodiments of the Sith and Jedi struggled in a fountain of lightning as Yoda used Tuda Minis to deflect the electricity. Focusing his mind, Yoda locked eyes with Sidious, redirecting the Emperor's lightning back at him, much like Windu had done earlier. For a fleeting moment, Sidious felt vulnerable, his strength dwarfed by the small but formidable Jedi Master. The redirected lightning then erupted in a powerful blast, sending both combatants flying apart. Sidious managed to grab onto a Senate pod, securing his position, while Yoda fell several stories below. Though unharmed by the fall, Yoda found himself out of reach and recognized the futility of continuing. Accepting the stalemate, Yoda retreated into exile, breathless and shaken as never before. Sidious reverted to cackling in triumph, his momentary vulnerability replaced by the confidence of victory. The Grand Master of the Jedi Order had taken his shot and failed to beat him. However, his focus shifted abruptly when he sensed Darth Vader might be in mortal danger. Prioritizing his apprentice's fate, Palpatine demanded his shuttle at once. The confrontation between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader ended a lot differently to Palpatine's and Yoda's. Kenobi mortally wounded his former apprentice and left him to die on the fiery shores of Mustafar. However, Palpatine arrived just in time to find Vader severely burned but still clinging to life. Upon seeing the weak and helpless shell laying there, Palpatine was torn between anger at Vader's failure and the immense potential he still represented. After some deliberation, though, he decided to save him. He had spent 20 years turning him toward the dark side. Having him die now would have been a waste. Using the dark side of the Force to stabilize Vader, he ensured his survival until they could return to Coruscant. During the shuttle journey, Palpatine personally worked to keep Vader alive. During the shuttle ride, he thought to himself that perhaps he did hold the merest sliver of affection for Vader that he had never held for Maul or Dooku. The reasoning for this may have lain in Vader's one-of-a-kind potential, realizing that finding another apprentice with comparable power might take decades, if it were possible at all. On Coruscant, Vader underwent excruciating reconstructive surgery. Palpatine ensured Vader remained conscious throughout the painful process, believing the suffering would strengthen him. Outfitted with life-sustaining armor, Vader awoke and questioned the fate of Padme. Palpatine, not fully aware of the truth himself, convinced Vader that his own actions had caused her death, shattering Anakin Skywalker's spirit completely. Consumed by grief and rage, Vader destroyed the operating theater and briefly attempted to strike down Palpatine. However, his weakened state left him powerless. Accepting that Palpatine was his only remaining ally, Vader fully embraced the Sith. Chapter 16. The Rise of the Galactic Empire. With the rise of the Empire, the institutions of the Republic were dismantled and reshaped in a process called imperialization. Coruscant became the Imperial Center, and the Galactic Senate was renamed the Imperial Senate. The Republic's military branches became the Imperial Army and Navy. The Jedi Temple, the symbol of security for the Republic for years, was modified into the Imperial Palace for Palpatine, making a mockery of the Jedi that their symbol of strength was now his palace. He made sure to modify certain areas of the temple as well to further discredit the Jedi, painting them as the traitors of the Republic and starting to wipe their legacy off the face of the galaxy. In time, the Jedi should be forgotten by the galaxy, only to be known by distant whispers and old legends. Palpatine's pledge on the declaration of a new order to bring the entire galaxy under Imperial control was fulfilled. In the Empire's first year, the military launched a series of campaigns across the Mid and Outer Rims, later known as the Reconquest of the Rim. He also gave in to the request of the creation of the Death Star, a weapon powerful enough that its mere presence should squash any uprising against the Empire dead in its tracks. As Order 66 didn't kill every last Jedi, Palpatine had the Inquisitorius, with Vader at the helm, created to hunt down any remaining Jedis in the galaxy. To further mold Vader into a true Sith, Vader was guided in Sith lore. As was tradition with the Siths, Palpatine didn't teach Vader by simply teaching him what he knew, rather he had a lot of different missions and traps set up that Vader should come out of stronger or perish trying. His apprentice was a lot weaker now due to his cybernetics, but still, he could fill the role of apprentice to him just fine, should he be able to pass all the challenges he'd set up for him. As a next order of business, the clones, seen as futile and too expensive, were slowly decommissioned and replaced by the Imperial Stormtroopers, consisting of recruits from across the galaxy. Palpatine also had the Imperial Security Bureau founded as a secret police force. The ISB acted as a counterbalance to Imperial intelligence and installed political officers in the military to ensure loyalty. The Empire's rule was defined by suppression and fear, consolidating power under Emperor Palpatine's authoritarian regime. Civil liberties were cut, dissent was ruthlessly silenced, and a culture of surveillance kept the populace in line. Through organizations like the Imperial Security Bureau and the Coalition for Progress, the Empire monitored and controlled nearly every aspect of daily life, ensuring loyalty and obedience from its citizens, while in turn providing protection and control. Non-human species faced systemic exclusion from power and privilege, reflecting the Empire's human-centric policies. Atrocities became commonplace as powerful governors such as Grand Moff Tarkin employed the Tarkin Doctrine to maintain control through fear. The Empire was here to stay, just like Palpatine had envisioned it when he sought out on the quest to conquer the Republic. Chapter 17: The Secret Apprentice and Whispers of a Rebellion. Years into the Empire, it was flourishing. The Empire had absolute control over the entire galaxy and were the commanding force from the core all the way to the Outer Rim. Although there had been several assassination attempts on Palpatine's life during that time, he had survived each one. Vader also had proven himself time and time again to be a worthy apprentice. His goal now was to make sure that he could have his empire go on forever. Thus, Plagueis' goal of immortality also started to be of even greater interest to Palpatine. However, there were also other issues at hand. The Imperial Senate had traitors among them, some of whom were rumored to be taking part in organizing a rebellion against the Empire as they disapproved of their methods. He had already stripped the Senate of a lot of authority, having them basically be mere representative figures of the different systems without any real say on important matters. He also rarely attended Senate sessions, only attending those that absolutely called for his presence to spin the narrative in his favor. Thus, hearing that there were traitors among them was plausible. During the same time, he was informed by his agents that Vader had a secret apprentice called Galen Merrick. As was the tradition for Siths, Vader seemed to have started plotting against him, growing tired of Palpatine's constant games with him. However, although angry at first, Palpatine saw this situation as one that could be turned into an advantage for himself, an opportunity to test Vader or even replace him. He revealed to Vader, just like to Dooku with Ventress, that he was aware of Vader's secret apprentice and that he should kill him immediately. Vader, knowing he had no other choice, killed Starkiller while Palpatine watched through the HoloNet. However, Vader didn't give up that easily. Although he mortally wounded Merrick, he made sure he survived and nursed him back to health. Palpatine, though, once again one step ahead, was aware of Vader's action. But this time, he saw yet a bigger opportunity with Galen Merrick rather than just testing Vader. He had Vader lead Merrick to believe that he should gather the enemies of the Emperor to form an alliance against the Empire. Then, together, they could overthrow and topple Palpatine. Galen Merrick did as asked, but after gathering the senators and other high-ranking officials that were planning to form the alliance, he was betrayed by Vader, being revealed that it was merely a ploy to capture all of Sidious's enemies in one place and arrest them. Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and several others were then arrested, and Starkiller was left for dead after a duel with Vader. The Emperor's most formidable political rivals, Senators Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and Garm Bel Iblis, were captured and brought aboard the incomplete Death Star. Palpatine reveled in the thought of how they would be ruthlessly interrogated, tortured, and executed as traitors to the Empire. However, just as he prepared to enact his grim plan, Merrick suddenly showed up on the Death Star. Merrick had infiltrated the battle station with the goal of rescuing the rebel leaders. Reclaiming his true identity and recalling fragments of his past, Galen Merrick cast aside his Sith name and embraced his legacy as a Jedi, now fully committed to the rebellion's cause. Merrick confronted Vader and defeated him, only to be tempted by Palpatine to kill his former master and take his place. Resisting the dark side, Merrick chose to protect his allies instead. When Palpatine unleashed Force Lightning on the Senators, Merrick sacrificed himself, using his body to shield his comrades from the Emperor's Force Lightning. In his final act, Merrick unleashed a powerful Force explosion, destroying much of the throne room and enabling the rebel leaders to escape. Merrick's death left Palpatine enraged and disappointed, as he had hoped to replace Vader with Merrick as his apprentice, seeing Vader being beaten by Merrick. Instead, Merrick's martyrdom inspired the fledgling Rebel Alliance, solidifying its resolve against the Empire. The Rebel Alliance was born on that day, and Sidious couldn't stop it. Chapter 18: The Rebel Alliance. The Rebel Alliance, although fully active and formed at this point, Palpatine saw as more of a nuisance at this moment. The Imperial military stretched to the furthest points of the galaxy, and these insurgencies could be easily dealt with in his mind. There were more pressing matters at hand. From the start, Palpatine sought to eliminate the Senate, the last standing symbol of the Republic. Over time, Palpatine carefully stripped away the Senate's power, waiting for the perfect moment. By 0 BBY, with his political system fully in place, military loyalty secured, and the Death Star operational, he was ready to act. Warrants were issued for the arrest of all suspected rebels among the senators, and stormtroopers stormed the Senate, detaining hundreds. Those with confirmed rebel ties disappeared without a trace. Palpatine had effectively destroyed the Constitution, establishing a new power structure with himself at the top, followed by the Grand Moffs, and Governors, with each owing their positions and allegiance to the Emperor. The Death Star became the ultimate symbol of the New Order, surpassing even Palpatine himself. After years of research and development, it was ready to demonstrate its power, but Palpatine didn't anticipate how its discovery would embolden the rebellion. At Scarif, his forces suffered a catastrophic defeat, as the Death Star plans were stolen by the Rebel Alliance in one of the biggest displays of power from their side. The destruction of Alderaan, ordered by Tarkin and approved by Palpatine, was a pivotal moment. Though Palpatine publicly expressed sorrow for the loss of the planet, he used the event to justify further persecution of the rebellion, claiming Alderaan was secretly developing bioweapons. All this couldn't stop the Rebel Alliance, though. Rather, it made them more determined than ever. Chapter 19: Galactic Civil War. The destruction of the Death Star at the Battle of Yavin was a significant blow to the Empire. Palpatine was outraged that his symbol of strength had evaporated into space dust, and several of his high-ranking officials perished on the station. Palpatine responded by punishing those responsible for the failure, including demoting Vader and ordering harsh reprisals against several officers. During this time, he had Vader tested repeatedly again, this time by having several enhanced cyborgs created with the sole task of killing Vader to become his new apprentice. Vader, though, succeeded in defeating these cyborgs, passing his test once again. During a meeting on the newly constructed Super Star Destroyer Executor, Palpatine revealed to Vader that he had always planned for him to be his ultimate apprentice, that all the apprentices before him had only served the purpose to set the way for him, complimenting Vader on his resolve to stay by his side. Moments later, he also discovered that Vader had an intensified interest in finding the Force-sensitive pilot who destroyed the Death Star, which was revealed to be his son, Luke Skywalker. Palpatine sensed that Vader's interest could be to try and overthrow him alongside his son, but was rather amused at the thought of it, confident that no one could really come close to his power. In the grand scheme of things, Palpatine, despite his role in unintentionally creating the rebellion, remained largely unconcerned about its threat. Although they had destroyed the Death Star, he saw them as a useful tool to further instill martial law across the galaxy. After all, the rebels couldn't truly harm him without the Force. With these thoughts, he gave in to order the construction of the second Death Star. Meanwhile, the Galactic Civil War raged on. The rebellion had boldly attacked several Imperial systems and weapons factories and were being hunted down by the Imperial Navy throughout several star systems. After the Empire's victory at Hoth, Palpatine revealed to Vader that he knew about Luke Skywalker being Anakin's son, and that he was becoming a serious threat due to his growing power in the Force. Palpatine intended to either convert Luke to the dark side or eliminate him if necessary. Vader, during his first meeting with Luke, though, failed to convert Luke. Palpatine expressed his disappointment, but allowed Vader to claim some success in influencing Luke's ambition. But the emergence of a powerful Force-sensitive person was a slightly worrisome factor. Chapter 20: Empire's End. To bring the Galactic Civil War to an end and cement his control back, Palpatine devised a cunning strategy to lure the entire Rebel Alliance into a deadly trap. Central to his plan was the construction of the second Death Star, stationed above the forest moon of Endor and shielded by a generator on the moon's surface. During this period, Palpatine engineered several Rebel victories, such as the destruction of a cloaked prototype Super Star Destroyer during an assault on the Fondor shipyards, to bolster the Rebels' confidence and lead them to unwittingly fall into his carefully laid snare at the right moment. Palpatine allowed Rebel spies to discover the Death Star's location while spreading false information that the superweapon was incomplete. In truth, the station's primary weapon was fully operational, and a massive Imperial Navy fleet was stationed to defend it. Both Darth Vader and Palpatine boarded the Death Star, confident that the Rebels, believing they could destroy the superweapon and kill the Emperor, would seize the opportunity to launch a full-scale assault. Thus, they could crush the rebellion once and for all in a single battle. Confident in the Empire's superiority, Palpatine dismissed reports of the Rebel fleet gathering near Sullust when questioned by Vader, deeming them insignificant. He also predicted that the Rebels might send a strike team to disable the Death Star's shield generator on Endor, so he ensured both the main entrance and the backdoor bunker were heavily fortified. Furthermore, the generator itself was guarded by an elite legion drawn from the Empire's top military branches, guaranteeing that any strike team would fail to disable the shield before the Rebel fleet's arrival. Despite his meticulous planning, Palpatine failed to sense Luke Skywalker's presence aboard the shuttle Tydirium. When Darth Vader informed him of Luke's presence, Palpatine was genuinely surprised that Vader could sense what he had not. Nevertheless, after ensuring Vader's focus, he tasked him with capturing Luke, confident the young Jedi would willingly confront them. True to Palpatine's foresight, Luke, believing his father could be redeemed, surrendered and was brought to the Death Star. During their encounter, Palpatine learned of Yoda's death through probing Luke's mind and mocked the fallen Jedi Master. To flaunt his power, he freed Luke from his binders with a flick of his finger and dismissed his royal guards, declaring his intent to make Luke his Sith apprentice. When Luke hinted at the Death Star's imminent destruction, Palpatine smugly revealed his foreknowledge of the Rebel plans and how he manipulated them into a trap. As the Alliance arrived, Palpatine unveiled his trump card. The Death Star's super laser was fully operational, much to Luke's shock. As the Rebel fleet suffered devastating losses and Luke's frustration mounted, Palpatine goaded him into a duel with Vader. Luke initially restrained his anger until Vader, probing his thoughts, discovered the existence of his sister Leia. Vader's suggestion of corrupting her enraged Luke, driving him into a frenzy. In the ensuing duel, Luke nearly killed Vader, severing his mechanical hand, but ultimately resisted his anger, throwing aside his lightsaber. Palpatine then realized as the situation was unraveling. The Rebel fleet had rallied against his forces, and the shield generator on Endor had been destroyed, leaving the Death Star vulnerable. Despite these setbacks, Palpatine remained confident. He had issued orders to destroy Endor as a contingency, and believed his ultimate victory lay in either turning Luke to the dark side or keeping him as a prisoner. However, as with his earlier failure with Galen Marek, Palpatine's overconfidence would once again prove his undoing. Luke refused to join him, declaring himself a Jedi like his father before him. Sidious couldn't quite believe it, but decided to unleash his wrath upon Luke Skywalker. Simply killing the young Jedi would not suffice. He had to suffer for his defiance. Raising his arms, the Emperor unleashed a relentless barrage of Force lightning that brought Luke to his knees. Untrained in countering such an attack, Luke struggled to defend himself. Sidious mocked him mercilessly, calling him weak and foolish, as he gradually increased the power of the assault, prolonging Luke's agony. The Emperor also intended for Vader to pay for his perceived betrayal. He envisioned forcing his apprentice to carry his son's lifeless body to the core shaft and cast it into the abyss. When Vader staggered to his feet and returned to Sidious's side, the Emperor saw it as proof of his continued loyalty. Yet, Sidious had forgotten what had initially drawn Anakin Skywalker to the dark side, the desperate need to save those he loved. He never anticipated that Vader would defy him to protect his son. Without warning, Vader grabbed the Emperor from behind, pinning his arms and lifting him off the ground. Palpatine writhed in shock and pain, unleashing wild bursts of Force lightning that scorched the throne room, damaged Vader's life support systems, and seared his own body. The Emperor screamed both from the agony of his own bolts and the crushing grip of Vader's cybernetic limbs. In a final, defiant act, Vader hoisted Sidious high above his head and hurled him into the reactor shaft. Palpatine plummeted into the abyss, discharging lightning even as he fell. Upon striking the reactor, his body erupted in a massive surge of dark side energy that engulfed the throne room before dissipating down the chasm. Emperor Palpatine, Darth Sidious, the Sith that fulfilled the Grand Plan, who wiped out almost every Jedi and conquered the Republic, was dead. Moments later, Anakin Skywalker, grievously wounded by the ordeal, succumbed to his injuries. With their deaths, the unbroken lineage of the Sith Lords that had persisted since Darth Bane was finally ended, fulfilling the prophecy and restoring balance to the Force.